You're listening to What Was That Like? And this is the last episode for 2023, which means it's our year-end listener stories episode. For each episode of the show, we have a guest come on and tell their story. It might be someone who survived an alligator attack, or a person who was shot multiple times, or maybe someone who went on The Price is Right and won the showcase. Those are just a few examples of the over 160 past episodes, and they're all available to binge right now for free. And then at the very end of each episode, we have a listener story. This is a 5 to 10 minute short story that was sent in by a listener, just like you. It can be something sad, or amazing, or funny, just something that people find interesting. If you have a story like that, I'd love to have you send it in, and you might hear it on a future episode. You can email it to me at scott@whatwasthatlike.com. And for the final episode of the year, we hear all of those stories played back to back, which is what we're doing today. And I wanted to mention this. One of the stories, sort of toward the end, has a discussion of suicide. So just before that story plays, you'll hear a little alert like this. When you hear that, if you want to, you can fast forward about 4.5 minutes to the next story. So let's get on with it, and please enjoy the listener stories of 2023. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a girl hanging by her broken leg from the telephone wire.
And I called 911 and I said, I found a baby.
I turned around. I see a gun pointed at me close enough I could touch it.
She would hold our heads on the water all the time.
He levels the gun, pulls the trigger, and I go down.
Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't want to leave us.
My hair catches on fire.
I swear to God, this image is burned in my head for the rest of my life.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like?
Hi, my name is Sinead. I'm 33 years old. My name is spelled Sinead. I know it's weird. When I was 17 years old, so about 2007, 2008, I was sent to a wilderness program for juvenile delinquents in Idaho. I was woken up in the middle of the night, about 3 a.m., by two strange people I'd never met before in my life. They had handcuffs. They showed me their IDs and they said, hey, you need to come with us. And they wouldn't tell me where we were going. So and I didn't know what to do. I really didn't. I asked them where my parents were and they wouldn't tell me. They're just like, they know we're here. They let us in. And I was like, all right, whatever. So I get in the car with them and we go to the airport and we fly to Spokane, Washington. From there, we drove to Bonners Ferry, Idaho. And like I said, I have no idea what's going on this whole time. There, I'm strip searched. I've never been strip searched before. Never been to jail. I don't even have a felony. So this is all very new to me. And I'm given a bunch of things like a backpack, hiking boots, a water bottle. A bunch of stuff. Right there, I am shown the community area. It kind of looks like a clock. I don't really know how else to explain it, but it's like, at 6 o'clock, you've got the mess hall. At 1 o'clock, you've got the wood cutting area, 4 o'clock, whatever. Anyway, there's all these areas around the circle and we sleep in teepees. Yes, actual teepees. One for the boys, one for the girls. A few of the responsibilities that we were given, we had to clean the outhouse, which was absolutely fucking disgusting. And we also had to saw logs. And when I say that, I mean like we actually sawed logs. We didn't sleep. The boys would carry over these big ass logs from the forest. We didn't chop them down or anything, but they would somehow pull them all over to the wood cutting station. And me and a partner, we would saw this big log with a giant saw. Also did a bunch of like self-improvement exercises and, getting to know you games and all that bullshit. And then we also, we had to clean up after ourselves after dinner. We had to take the trash to this dumpster that was about a mile away. Me and another person were on each side of this trash can that was like 80 pounds of liquid trash. And we'd have to haul it all the way to this dumpster. And I can recall many times, feeling like my arm was going to fall off at any point. Also, in order to graduate, there were a couple things that we had to do. The first part was we had to do this thing called Ticket to Ride. And if you're familiar with AA or recovery or a fourth step, it's basically that. Basically, we just had to write down all the things we've done wrong in our life, and then they would mail it to our parents for them to read every single last horrific detail. As soon as that was completed, we were allowed to go on this hike, which was required in order for us to get out. So it's this week-long hike through Montana. Aside from the fact that I absolutely hated it, it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. At night, they let us sleep burrito style at one time, and we got to see the entire night sky, and there's no light pollution out there. So you saw everything, satellites, the Milky Way, you name it, we saw it. We were traversing across this very steep hill. So like I was walking across the steep incline, and I lost my footing, and I rolled all the way down this damn hill, and the only thing that stopped me from rolling any further was my face hitting a tree. And I woke up from that. Well, not woke up. I didn't pass out, but I came to from that with blood running down my face, thinking I'm dead. Like, this is it. This is the end. And sadly, no, it was not the end. After that, I realized I had sprained my ankle. And so I had to basically finish the rest of the hike with the sprained ankle and, crusted out blood on my head. We came back and we were done, basically. And there was only one more thing we had to do. We had to climb this giant tower structure. I'm terrified of heights. I refused to do it. I still did it, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. Fuck this. Like, the thing was like 40 or 50 feet high. Like, I'm terrified. That was done. Our parents were basically there. They showed up, I think, maybe the next day or something like that. And, of course, I saw them and I was really glad to see them. But at the same time, I was just like, die. Fuck you for doing this to me. So we get home, and for about 2 weeks, I think, roughly about, I was an angel. You know what I mean? I did anything my parents asked me to do. I cleaned my room. I did the dishes, took the trash out, just normal shit. And then I just I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore, so I left. And I ended up getting involved in drugs really bad, actually. I did heroin for about 2.5 years. I was shooting it and sorting it. I did go to rehab. The very last time I used heroin was May 23rd, 2010. I have not touched it since, and I'm extremely fortunate because when I stopped using it, that was when the crocodile and the carfentanil stuff was coming out and people were dropping like flies. So needless to say, I'm really grateful to be alive today. Today, I am a nurse. I have a child of my own. I've done it. I beat the statistic, and I don't mean to sound like I have control because I don't. But at the same time, I don't use heroin on a daily basis anymore. And I live a good life today. I was angry at my mother and my parents, but we've learned to, get through our issues. So I'm really grateful that I got this opportunity to speak my story, and I'm really glad you all got to hear it. So thanks for sticking along.
Are you afraid of bears? I can tell you one thing. I know my mom isn't. At least she said she wasn't. And that's exactly how I ended up in one of the most terrifying situations of my life at the fresh young age of only 9 years old. I grew up in Kelowna. It's a little city that thinks it's a big city and prides itself in being fabulous in all 4 seasons. There was a ski hill close by for the winters. The spring had orchards full of cherry blossoms. There's a lake with beaches for summer and wineries to enjoy through till the late fall. Now, my family took advantage of all of that, but the one thing my parents loved the most was camping. We had a little boat that we'd put in the water, spend the day tubing and kneeboarding, and then we'd find a camping spot along the shore somewhere and set up camp. When it came to bedtime, my mom and dad would usually sleep on the boat, and my sister Carly and I would sleep on land in a tent. It was always so much fun, so I honestly never thought about what could go wrong. One night, as we sat by the fire, probably telling stories and making fun of each other, I heard a noise on the hillside beside us. I became completely distracted from the marshmallow I was roasting, trying to strain to see where that sound was coming from. Eventually, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw it. It was a black bear, and it wasn't far away from us at all. I grabbed my sister's arm and pointed to her. We both panicked for obvious reasons, and my mom rolled her eyes and told us all about how when she was a little girl, she worked at summer camps on Mount Robson, and there were always bears, but they're more afraid of you than you are of them. So you just need to keep your food up high, and if you see one, make a lot of noise and it'll go away. She was so matter-of-fact about it that we almost felt silly for being afraid. So later that evening, we hugged Mom and Dad goodnight as we retreated to our tent and went to sleep completely oblivious as to what awaited us in the morning. After just a few hours of rest with the sun barely rising, I woke up to my sister's nails dug right into the skin of my arm. Ouch! What the heck, Carly? She whispered, Jaina, there's a bear. As my eyes slowly opened, I looked above me and saw that our tent had in fact become the bear's new plaything. He was tossing the tarps around back and forth, and I remembered my mom saying that we were supposed to make a lot of noise, but I was frozen, stunned. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a paw tore through the fabric right between my sister and I. We laid there, gripping each other's hands as the paw rummaged around from my shoulder to hers. Our hands were so sweaty. Telling the story now, I'm actually surprised we didn't pee ourselves. I guess eventually he realized he wasn't going to find what he was looking for, so he retracted his paw from the inside of our tent and moved on to checking out everything around our campsite. Meanwhile, my sister and I just laid there, terrified with the tent collapsed over our faces. We were only able to see orange, and we were completely unsure of when it would be safe to find our way out. After what felt like an eternity of lying there completely still, we hadn't heard any bear sounds for a couple of minutes, so we decided that it was possibly time to emerge, and we sprinted to our parents on the boat. There they were, sound asleep, completely unaware of anything their kids had been going through. I shook my dad's shoulder abruptly and said, Dad, a bear just tore its paw through our tent. And he said, okay, girls, very funny. We need some more sleep. So we sat on the boat, trembling, just waiting for them to feel like waking up. Eventually, they did. And since we were still on the bear thing, my dad thought he would humor us and go up the hill to see what we were talking about. He said, okay, all right, let's see what this bear supposedly did to your tent. He walked with us up the hill, saw our little fabric castle collapsed, and looked down at us like, okay, you two are so funny. Then he picked it up, not knowing that it was the side that the bear had torn its paw through, and saw the perfect claw marks. There was no way we could have faked that. He yelled down the hill, holy shit, Wendy, come here. And my mom came up to see. I asked her, did that ever happen to you on Mount Robson, Mom? The following summer, my parents had the genius idea to go back to the same camping area again. Surprise, surprise, in the middle of the night as we were roasting marshmallows, we heard a bear. But this time, we didn't take the chance. We packed up our camp in the middle of the night, moved to the other side of the lake, and set up there. Again, my parents went to sleep on the boat, and my sister and I were sleeping in our now taped up tent. Doesn't duct tape fix everything? This time, when we woke up in the morning, it was to the sound of sprinklers. Well, we didn't realize it because it was so dark when we made our move, but we'd actually set up our tent in someone's backyard. Retelling this story now, I'm wondering, what must it have been like waking up in the morning, pouring your coffee, a bowl of Cheerios, looking out your window and seeing a whole family camping on your lawn? Oops. As an adult, my parents loved to make fun of me for being too bougie to go camping or too fancy to camp with them. But now that you've heard my story, can you really blame me? That's my 5-minute story. Hopefully you liked it. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me on my podcast at Big Lash Energy or on my website at hellojaina.com. And of course, on Instagram at Jaina Marie Makeup, JAYNAMARIE. Again, Scott, thank you for having me on your show and for creating this platform for people to tell their stories. It's such a cool idea, and I love to hear what you have for us each week. Thanks again. Mwah.
In the early 1990s, I lived in Honolulu, Hawaii, on the island of Kauai. One day, I was foolish enough to let a friend talk me into going boogie boarding with him when I had no business going out there at all. I had no experience with boogie boards or surfing or anything ocean-related, and waves that day were enormous. I mean, these waves were huge. I didn't understand it at the time, but this was also a very, very dangerous shore break. My first clue should have been the fact that we were in Kauai, Hawaii, and there wasn't a single surfer out there. But I didn't pick up on that for some reason. My friend explained to me how we could paddle out in the channel and position ourselves perfectly to catch a wave. My decision to go out there with him turned out to be one of the stupidest decisions I've ever made, and it almost cost me my life. In any case, we paddled out in the channel, and pretty soon we were out there with these giant waves rolling underneath us. I was facing toward the beach, and suddenly I heard my friend yelling from 15 or 20 yards behind me, "I'm getting out of here. It's too late for you. You're caught. Paddle as hard as you can and try to ride one in. Hurry." I looked back and saw him paddling frantically away from me, leaving me out there alone. Then I saw what looked like a tsunami headed straight for me, and I knew I was in serious trouble. Terrified, I began to paddle as hard as I could toward the shore, hoping I would somehow be able to ride it and come out of it okay. When the wave got to me, the first thing I remember thinking was how high it was. It felt like it lifted me 100 feet, and I panicked and let go of my boogie board. I was not wearing a leash, and it went crashing down in front of me. When I came over the falls, I got driven head first into the seafloor and was tossed around like a Raggedy Ann doll. The pain was so intense, I thought it broke my neck. I couldn't figure out which way was up, and I couldn't hold my breath for much longer. When I finally came to the surface and got my head above water to take a breath, I was horrified to see the face of an even bigger wave bearing down on me. I was caught in the impact zone and could not have been in a more dangerous situation. As I got pulverized into the seafloor and tossed around again, I thought for sure I would die. After getting hammered by a third wave, the whole thing finally ended with me getting washed up on shore, bruised and battered, and crying like a child. Needless to say, I didn't get in the water again for a long time.
Hi, Scott. My name is Rachel, and I just wanted to call and tell you thank you for all the wonderful work you do. I love the show. I love all the interesting stories. And I just wanted to call and share one of my stories. When I was 2 years old, this is one of my first memories. I was 2 years old, almost 3. My brother and I decided we were going to go sledding on a cold, snowy day, and decided the perfect place was this school across the street that had some little hills behind it. So we headed over there, and in the parking lot, there were a few cars coming and going because there were some basketball games going on that particular day. It was a Saturday, so it was, rec league basketball games. As we're walking through the parking lot, boom, all of a sudden, I am knocked to the ground and pinned down, and I had no idea what had happened. But a truck had been pulling out of a parking space and didn't see my little tiny person and ran me over. So here I was, 2 years old, and this truck had backed up over me, and then my brother started to scream bloody murder. "You killed my sister! You killed my sister!" And the truck driver stopped, and seeing my brother and hearing my brother got scared and didn't know what to do, and he pulled back forward. So the truck knocked me down onto my belly. The tire went up my leg, onto my back, and then he stopped. And then he pulled forward again, so the tire went back down my back and down my leg again. But if he had kept going, he could have possibly run over my head. So it was probably better how it ended up happening. So an ambulance was called, and I was taken to a local hospital, small hospital, a few minutes away. We just lived in a small town, and this rural hospital just said, "We are not equipped to care for her injuries." So they life-flighted me, which I remember. I remember taking off in that helicopter. They life-flighted me to a children's hospital in a nearby big city. And there they discovered that I had no broken bones, miraculously. Kids that age are kind of rubbery anyway, so I had no broken bones, but I was internally bleeding. I had what they called a cracked liver. And my doctor was a very good doctor, and he said, you know, the liver is a very resilient organ. If she could just hold still for a few weeks, I bet it will heal itself and we won't have to do surgery. So, not an easy task for a 2-year-old to hold still for a few weeks. But I was in the hospital for 10 days, and then when I returned home, my parents had set up just a steady stream of entertainment. It was movies, books, friends and neighbors and family coming in to play with me, to read stories to me. Tons of people brought toys and activities, coloring books, all kinds of things, just to keep me entertained and still so that I could heal. And I recovered fully, and I haven't had any lasting effects. Physically, I have been great my whole life. And surprisingly, although this was one of my first memories, I haven't been very traumatized by it. I think I was so young that I didn't quite grasp the magnitude of it. But now, as a mother, man, my heart just breaks for my parents, what they must have gone through. And anytime I hear of a child getting hit by a car or run over by a car, I try to reach out to them, try to reach out to the family, and try to give them some hope, because it turned out so well for me, and I feel very, very blessed. Someone was definitely looking out for me, and I'm so grateful for that, because it's been a wonderful life, and it could have been cut very short.
My boyfriend wets the bed almost every night. He has a kidney disorder and he can't help it, but he also doesn't do anything to lessen the damage besides wear adult diapers at night that don't work for him. We almost had to get rid of our couch and my mattress from a month's worth of damage. He's a great guy and everything's perfect except for this. He had this problem since he was young, and he doesn't seem to mind sleeping in his own urine or going places smelling like it, let alone having me sleep in it and smell like it. I'm almost always the one to clean it up even after asking him to do it, and all of our clothes smell like pee even after washing. I had to beg him to get the diapers, and he's too stubborn to buy a different brand, even though the ones he has just soak right through. When he doesn't sleep on the couch, 9 times out of 10, I wake up soaked in his pee, and every time I mention it, he gets defensive or embarrassed. I thought I could handle it because when I was spending the night at his house, it was only a few times that happened, but when he recently moved in with me, then I realized it's almost every night. I don't know what to do, and I feel like I can't tell anyone about this because I don't want anyone to see him different. And I love him, but this issue is putting me in a really tough spot.
In 1981, I was a high school student with a part-time job working at McDonald's. I didn't have a car in those days, so I'd have to walk the 2 kilometers, which is 1.5 miles in American speak, to work. If I worked later than 11 p.m., the managers were required to give rides to anyone not driving to get home safely. But if you worked in the mornings, you didn't have that luxury. So one weekend I was scheduled for the morning shift, 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. So this meant that I'd have to get up around 5 a.m., get ready, and then take that 2-mile walk to work, 2-kilometer walk to work. The walk to work was pretty isolated. I was walking by backyards of houses, and the last leg of the walk was nothing but high fences on one side and a huge open field on the other. I was on that last leg of my trip around 5:30 a.m. It was still dark, and this dark Camaro drove by, slowed down, and then idled beside me. The man driving the car looked older than me, maybe in his 20s or early 30s, and I was suddenly mindful of how alone and exposed I was. But back in those days, I was a very non-confrontational person. I went along with whatever was asked of me. I didn't know how to say no, which is why I was stuck in doing that shift. I had no self-esteem and very low self-worth. I was a prime target for what happened next. The driver leaned out the window and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Fine." I smiled back meekly. He said, "Where are you going? Where are you headed? Can I give you a ride?" And I said, No, thank you. I'm just going up a little further." He started to cajole me. He said, "Come on, I don't bite. I can get you there faster." And I said, "No, thanks. I'm going to be too early, and then I'll be standing outside waiting to get in." I don't know why I felt the need to tell this perfect stranger that, but I guess that was part of my placating personality. And he said, "Well, that's okay. We can stop somewhere and go for coffee." So my inner radar is like dinging loudly, almost deafening. And I started walking faster. And I said, "No, thanks," a little more forcefully. He wouldn't stop asking, and now I'm scared. So suddenly I blurred out, "No, F off." He stopped the car, opened up the door, and had one foot outside the car. And he says to me, "You can do this the easy way or the hard way. Get in the effing car." So do you know how fear focuses you in a second? As if a heavy, wet, dark blanket just drops out of the sky onto you, buckling your knees. That metallic taste that fills your mouth, and you've stopped breathing. This all happened to me in a nanosecond. Part of me, the meek people pleaser, almost took a step forward. But then, and I don't know where or how I got the courage, but a loud, confident, kick-ass voice came out of my mouth and said, "If you take one more step out of your car, I will scream so loud the entire city will hear me." And the guy stopped advancing. He looked at me and he made one more "get in the car" comment, and I said, "No." And then he got back in the car and he drove off. So the next 5 minutes to work were the longest 5 minutes of my life. I practically flew across the parking lot of the mall and tried to open the doors, but they were locked. So I started beating them frantically, and my supervisor let me in, and I collapsed crying hysterically. We had the police come in and file a report, but nothing came of it. So needless to say, I never had to work the morning shift ever again. But I wonder who that voice was that spoke up that day, because it wasn't the meek, mild little me. But I thank her for everything.
When I graduated high school, I was 18, and I wanted to see more of the country. I live in the U.S., so I bought a 30-day unlimited Amtrak ticket. It was just me going alone. I got on the train, and I was nervous and excited. And my first leg was like a 4-day train ride. I just wanted to get to the other side of the country, far away from what was possible right away. And I just had a seat on the train, no bed. And I had to somehow figure out how to sleep on the seat. And the guy I was sitting next to, he was writing a book about how to ride on trains, which was like the perfect person to be sitting next to, right? He knew all the tricks of riding on the train. It was just a fantastic traveling companion. And there was a nice family riding in the seats in front of me. And behind me was a sweet couple who was funny and generous. Like they were passing on wisdom to me through like stories and parables. And behind them was the porter, the guy who worked on the train and took care of any issues in our car and stuff. And that was who I was going to be traveling with for the next 4 days. This was like my little traveler pod. The first day was great. I got to know the train and the people on it, and it was just super. And I had plenty of food and things to do. And actually, I had a good night's sleep that first night, which was kind of surprising. So the next day, I was there feeling more safe and comfortable than I could have ever imagined. I could have easily sat next to someone who was like a horrible person, but everyone around me was just so wonderful, and the whole experience was great. But this made me start to worry. Things were going too well. I started to think, oh no, does this mean something awful is going to happen to me? Why am I being so lucky right now? I don't want to be lucky now. I want to be lucky when the going gets tough or when I'm in some sort of weird situation. If I exhaust all my luck now at the beginning of this trip, is there going to be any luck left over for me in the other 28 days that I have on this train? These thoughts swarmed my brain. They started burning into my soul somehow. I started getting nervous about it. Then suddenly I felt lackadaism. Just recently, I learned what this word means. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but I saw it and I was just like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of this time that I felt this way. Lackadaism is a feeling you get when you want a disaster to happen, to give you some sort of clarity in life. Like when the arc of your life is just going too smooth and you want it to be kinked a little bit just to give you a sense of purpose and a new direction that you can focus on. And I was feeling this lackadaism because my opportunities just seemed unlimited and whatever I wanted to do, I could do. And that made me start to really worry that maybe I'm not going to make the best choices. If anything I could do, I can do. And I need something to guide me a little bit here, to put me in a direction. And a disaster is exactly what I need to happen here because I've just been way too lucky on like the first 2 days of my trip. So I decided I needed to create my own disaster. I was looking out the window, drinking from a water bottle, and I made a split-second decision. I threw the water bottle into my huge backpack upside down with no cap on, soaking everything in my luggage, my clothes, my food, everything I had in there. And then I acted like, oh no, I just spilled my water and it's everywhere now. And I even got the guy next to me wet a little bit on accident. I didn't mean to do that. Well, now I had a really big problem that I had to deal with. You can't just ignore this. I had to figure out a way to dry everything in my backpack when all I had was a seat on a train as my space to do it in. There were no washers or dryers on the train. It was wonderful to deal with this disaster. It was glorious, and it absolutely forced me to focus on this problem, which helped me pass the time, and it gave me clarity, and it got me over that feeling of lackadaism. Obviously, I have no idea if causing a disaster made it so I didn't have any other disasters on that trip, or if it gave me more luck in the future. It probably didn't do any of that, but the rest of the trip did go great. And that trip helped shape me into the person I am now, with new perspectives and experiences in life.
I was walking my dog the other day in our neighborhood, and I saw a cop car pull up with his lights flashing. That's probably about 20, 30 feet ahead of me and stop in front of a house. Not completely unusual, but enough to be like, oh, maybe I'll see something interesting. So as I keep walking towards the cop car with my dog, I see behind him about 15 feet is a big armored car that camouflaged. I'm kind of looking at it like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then as I'm looking at the car, I see 3 SWAT men run out of the back of the car with their rifles drawn, jogging toward a house. And then I look back at the cop, and he's pulling out his big rifle out of his car. And I lock eyes with the cop, and I literally say, nope. And I turn around, and I start running the other way. I'm listening to a podcast as I walk my dog, which is probably your podcast because I'm addicted to your stories and I love stories. But past my earpod, I can hear a gunshot. Then I really start hunting because the neighborhood is empty right now because it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sprinting in the other direction. I see a car start to come up the street, and I wave frantically at him. No, don't go. And I hurriedly explain, there's a SWAT car down there. I hear gunshots. Don't go down there. And he's looking at me like I'm crazy, but I keep going back the other way, and he's sitting in his car for probably another 2 minutes before he turns around and decides to go down another street. But, I'm connected with Facebook and the crime watch in the area and stuff, and so I'm looking and thinking, surely this is going to come up somewhere. And I even post, does anyone know what happened? And nothing. No responses, just like I almost imagined it. That I would think that I was imagined it, but I have the image of the SWAT people running out of the back of the SWAT car with their guns drawn, burned into my head. So I know I didn't imagine it. I just had no clue what happened. So thanks for listening.
In 2000, my boyfriend and I bought a house where we lived with our kids from previous marriages. Life was good at first, but within a year, it had changed dramatically. He had become very manipulative and controlling. His daughter was a master manipulator as well and had become a handful. Still, I thought I could make this work. My boyfriend was an only child and came to the United States in 1970. I was very unhappy and was planning on moving out with my daughter when he was diagnosed with cancer. I felt obligated to stay and take care of his kids. In 2004, he went through a stem cell transplant and had to move in with his parents for a month. Upon arriving home, things got worse each day and he fought me daily on taking his medications. He was in and out of the hospital weekly. I was teaching full-time and taking care of the house and kids and making the hour drive daily to the hospital in the evenings. During one of the visits, his parents had brought in a lawyer who was a longtime family friend. He was there to do a living will. In the will, my daughter was to receive his SUV, which she drove to and from school. I was to get the house and only have to pay property taxes. In the event of his passing, I was willing to raise his kids, even though we weren't married. Shortly after that visit, he passed away. The lawyer was there the day he passed, and within minutes of his passing, my boyfriend's parents asked that I take the kids and leave the room. The very day after he died, his parents told me that my daughter and I had 48 hours to move out of the house. They had changed the will, which I don't think was legal. In the ensuing days, they went to my daughter's school where they took off the license plates so she could not drive it and took them off my car as well, stating that their son had purchased the car and I had no right to it. My daughter moved into her best friend's house and I stayed in a motel for 10 days while looking for a place for us to live. My sister gave me her car to use until I could purchase one. They had changed the locks on the house and I ended up having to call the police and show ID so I could pack up as much of our belongings as possible under their supervision. His parents watched my every move. They also told me that at the time, they took our husky to a shelter and would not tell me where. I went through a living hell for 2 years after he died because they totally turned my boyfriend's kids against me, and they seemed to take pleasure in leaving threatening hate messages on both my daughter's and my phones. I'm telling you this story because for anyone that is listening that has gone through death or a traumatic experience, stay strong and take each day one at a time. Time does heal all wounds and life does get better. Thank you, Scott, for listening to my story.
Hey there, this is Maya. When I was 18, I was invited to go sledding. It was my boyfriend at the time, his aunt, uncle, cousin, and myself. My first slide down the hill, my sled, which was one of those saucer-type sleds, it spun around, so I was sledding backwards. Could not see where I was going. I decided to just hang on and hold through. I ended up hitting a tree very hard. When I came to, I was nowhere near a tree. I had bounced back from the force and landed several feet away with a broken neck. I did not know I had broke my neck, so I stood up and walked away. In fact, I was more concerned with my boyfriend's aunt because I thought I had hit her. Little did I know that any minute turn of my head or my body could paralyze me from the neck down. Out of all the odds, and throughout this whole experience, I was not paralyzed at all. And unfortunately, 9 out of 10 people who experience the same type of neck fracture are paralyzed from the neck down. Luckily, I was convinced to go to the hospital to get checked out. If anything, I had a concussion. Whatever, sure, won't hurt things. While awaiting my x-rays, I was getting in and out of bed to use the bathroom and walk around with a broken neck. This is crazy. And once the doctors found out that my C6 was fractured, I could not stop hearing the word miracle. Coming from the nurses, the doctors, my family members, it still echoes in my head today. From there, I was airlifted to a bigger hospital where I laid prostrate for 6 whole days awaiting my emergency surgery. It was brutal, to say the least. Now, 10 years later, I still have my cadaver bone, 4 screws, and a metal plate behind my throat, holding things together. And I can walk, dance, and run around as much as I want. I feel like the luckiest person alive, and I'm so thankful. A few interesting tidbits that I'd like to add from this experience. I'm going to brag for a second. So this happened 3 months before graduating high school, and I still graduated in the top 10% with honors. And this is actually pretty funny. I never was a huge sweet person. I never really had a sweet tooth or anything until this happened. And now, to this day, I love sweets. And the first thing I ate after coming home from the hospital was an entire box of Chips Ahoy. Not like me at all. And my mom, she says that the man I got my cadaver bone from must have been a sweets lover. So thank you to him, because sweets are amazing.
It's fair to say I'm a karaoke fiend. The first time I remember doing karaoke was at a Six Flags, Great America, the one in Gurnee, Illinois, to be specific. Our high school class was there for a physics trip. I think we were supposed to learn how roller coasters react to gravity and different kind of angles and G-forces and things like that. I don't really remember learning anything, but I do remember performing the song Fat Lip by Sum 41 with one of my high school friends. It was a delightful time, and it got me hooked. To date, I have performed over 600 songs at karaoke at places all around the world. How do I know it's over 600 songs? I have a Spotify playlist of all the songs that I have done, which is just all kinds of bananas, but never fails to produce a good song. I also hosted karaoke when I lived in Los Angeles at a bar where Jewel, as part of a Funny or Die video, went undercover to do karaoke. If you've not seen that video, I highly recommend checking it out. And about 75% of the people in that video were still local, still regulars when I was hosting karaoke just a few months later there. I even won $50 in a karaoke contest one time. I sang the song My Band by D12, which features 6 different rappers in it. I got second place behind a woman who used to be a Shaka Khan backup singer. I still maintain that she had quite the advantage and the leg up, and it showed in the judging. All of that led to the foundation of what I consider my crowning karaoke achievement, which was performing at halftime of a WNBA basketball game. My friend was having her birthday at a bar that did gong karaoke. It's kind of like Showtime at the Apollo, but for singers. If you get enough people that are displeased with your performance, they'll hit a gong, you'll be escorted off the stage, and you don't get to finish. Little did I know that my friend's sister worked for the San Antonio Spurs entertainment crew, and she told me about something new that they were trying for the WNBA's Silver Stars, halftime karaoke. 1 week later, I was driving down to San Antonio, ready for my big break. I had a friend with me. We got there about 3 minutes before halftime was going to happen. My friend's sister was frantically running around looking for me. We bumped into each other, got all set. She said, go up to the second level. There'll be people up there that can get you all set up and all that. There's 3 of us that will be performing during halftime. The first is a 13-year-old girl who's the daughter of one of the executives in the Spurs organization. I don't remember exactly who it was, but I remember hearing that she was the daughter of one of the higher-ups. She sang Michael Jackson's Human Nature, which I think is a challenging choice for anyone, let alone a 13-year-old. But hey, teenage years, that's probably the hardest parts of our lives, right? Like, we're going through some stuff, and that's a song all about that. And she nailed it. She knocked it out of the park. She did a fantastic job. I wanted to lighten the mood a little bit, though. So the song I had chosen was I Believe in a Thing Called Love by The Darkness. It's got all the classics of a nice karaoke. It's got a guitar solo that you introduce by yelling guitar. It's got a nice high falsetto, a part where people can clap along, and it's just a great classic rock song. As I was waiting my turn, I felt less like Justin Hawkins, the frontman of The Darkness, and I certainly didn't have a skin-tight spandex bodysuit on like he often likes to rock. I was more like Eminem at the start of Lose Yourself. My knees were weak. My palms were sweaty. Thankfully, no vomit or spaghetti on my sweater. But then I got handed the mic. They told me where I could kind of move around to. I said, all right, that's going to be my Pong-esque back and forth, because I like to move around at karaoke. The guitar started and the drums kicked in, and I just lost myself in the song. It was a little disorienting seeing myself on the Jumbotron as I was performing, but I did my best to scan throughout the audience and look at the people who looked like they were having fun, who looked like they were enjoying the song. They were singing along too. Those were my people. And when I made eye contact and gave them a grin, it was just the coolest moment. When that guitar solo kicked in, I said guitar and handed my microphone to one of the employees there because I was going to go around and high five people in the section that was closest to me. They were all enjoying it. And I said, hey, I'm going to give you some dap here. Then they thought I was done performing, though. So I didn't get to sing the end of the song, but I got through 2 verses, 2 choruses, and part of a solo. I'd say that's pretty good. I got back down to my seat. My friend was super excited for me. She gave me a high five. Other people around me were saying how much they enjoyed it. And I sat back in my chair and watched the Silver Stars play the rest of their game. I think they lost by like 25 points that game. They were playing the Minnesota Lynx, who were the top team in the WNBA that year. So perhaps, like my battle with the Shaka Khan backup singer, not the fairest of fights, but we powered through, and it was a wonderful time. And I think the takeaway that I got from that is to say yes to things. I didn't know what to expect with it. Sure, I had done karaoke, but never in front of thousands of people. And it was just the coolest experience. I got over my stage fright. I was never going to see these people again, except for the one friend that I came with and maybe my friend's sister. Other than that, who cares? Let loose the wind. I think sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in our own insecurities and our own self-doubt. Throw it all into the wind. Try something new. Get out of the comfort zone. All the cliches. They're cliches for a reason because they work. I felt awesome with it. I still karaoke to this day. And the next time you're out at a karaoke bar and someone is on stage and they look a little uncomfortable, they look like maybe they don't know what they've done. Maybe they're even saying, hey, this is my first time ever performing karaoke. Go up to the stage, give them a high five. If you don't want to touch anyone, just give them some words of encouragement. They will certainly appreciate it knowing that someone has their back, just like thousands of people had my back. And I am very appreciative of it. Thank you for listening. And whatever you do today, whatever new thing you try today, I know you're going to rock it.
To give you a little background, my husband Keith and I were 42 at the time this happened. Our daughter was almost 6. I am a licensed practical nurse and was working in a clinic at the time. My husband is a maintenance worker employed in a foundry. We had a hard time getting pregnant and were only able to have one child. We live in Minnesota, and it was a very warm Sunday afternoon in August, and we were all outside cooling off in our above-ground pool we had put up for the summer. It wasn't very large or deep, but we still had a lot of fun in it. I took a break to sit on the patio and relax, about 15 to 20 feet from the pool, and Keith had gone inside to use the bathroom. Neither one of us was drinking alcohol, and we don't use drugs. Our daughter stayed in the pool doing her favorite activity, diving for toys that sink to the bottom. She would go down and gather all of them and ask us to throw them again while she closed her eyes so she couldn't see where they landed. Keith came back outside and we started talking. It was less than a minute later when he asked me where she was, since he couldn't see or hear her. I said she was going down for dive sticks, and we started talking again. It was only another minute when we realized it had been too long, so he ran to the pool and saw her lying on the bottom. Somehow he was able to reach over the pool, grab her suit, and pull her out. We still have no idea how this happened, but are so grateful that he was able to do this. Immediately, I ran over to where he put her on the grass and saw that her lips were blue and she wasn't breathing. Being a nurse since I was 20 years old, I have taken many CPR classes and have done it on people, but they were patients in a nursing home, not our child, and I had others with me to help. I forgot all of my training and was at a loss as to what I should do. I started praying and screaming to call 911, but we couldn't find a cell phone. We later found it under a towel. Keith did eventually find a phone, and they almost sent a helicopter to come to help us, but it turned out that it wasn't needed. Because it was hot, our neighbors had their windows closed with air conditioning on and didn't see us or hear us, even though they were all home and our houses are close together. I started praying again and doing rescue breathing, not even thinking to feel for a pulse. After a few breaths, nothing was happening, so I started chest compressions, and after about 20 to 30 seconds, she started coughing and throwing up a bit. It was at that time that the first responders came running around the back of the house to help. She was conscious by this point, but not responding. I'll never forget the way this kind man instructed us to get changed, grab clothes and shoes for her, along with her favorite toy or blanket while they got her loaded. He made sure our pets were inside and locked up our house while we were headed to the hospital. The paramedics at first wanted Keithan back with her since he was calming her down once she came to, as she was hysterical. And they told me to drive myself the 30 minutes to the closest hospital. The driver heard this and said I was going to ride up front with him since our town was completely under road construction and he didn't know the back roads, so that is what I did. I immediately called my family, as they only live a couple blocks away, and they also headed to the hospital. Our small town has a siren that blows for emergencies, so they had heard the siren but had no idea it was for her. We got to the emergency room, and there was a discussion of flying her to a bigger hospital, but one doctor said she was comfortable keeping her local. She does have a history of asthma, and that had concerned them. She spent the night in the pediatric intensive care unit and had her own private nurse. Once she got to the floor, the nurses fought over who got to give her a new American Girl doll, as hundreds were donated for girls her age. She quickly learned how to use the adjustable bed and call light and thought they were the best thing ever. I drove back home to get clothes for us because she said I would know where to find things before Dad would. And when I came back, she was showing off her new skills with the bed and call light. By 2 o'clock in the morning, she was done sleeping, so the nurse took her to the nurse's station to play games so we could sleep. We went home that morning, and the next day, her and I and the neighbor girls went back into the pool. I told her she couldn't live her life in fear, and she loved swimming. She agreed, but did wear a life jacket for the first few minutes, and I was right by her side. Now, I bet you're wondering what happened. It turns out she started twirling, ballerina style, got dizzy, and fell. They told us a child will instantly panic when they go underwater by accident, and they think that is what happened. The water was not over her head. She could swim and was very comfortable around water. A month later, we put her in private swim lessons at age 6. She started out in level 2, and by spring, she completed all of them except lifeguard training that she was too young for. Remember, she was only 6. She still loves swimming, but gets nervous when the water is over 8 feet. We did a lot of praying, and I really struggled with guilt as I was alone outside and should have been watching her better. While she was in the ICU, I asked Keith if he and I were okay. He said we both should have been watching her and we both saved her and that we were just fine. He and I are not ones to fight, and we weren't going to start then.
Most people get a part-time job to make extra money. For me, I actually lost money by choice. Let me explain. Before I tell you about my part-time job, let me tell you what I do in real life. I'm an author and podcaster, and for the past 25 years, I've also been a full-time pastor. I'm at a season of life where I'm feeling a bit sentimental, a bit reflective, would even say somewhat adventurous. My wife and I, we have 4 children, 3 are in college, and 1, a daughter, is getting ready to finish high school. Now, she's a fun kid, and I will tell you that our personalities are a lot alike. Most often, she's completely on board when I suggest we do something fun and out of the norm. I remember a few years ago, I had a flight canceled, and I suggested that we rent a sports car and drive 15 hours to Wisconsin so I could keep the speaking engagement that I had agreed to do. And with no time to prepare, she said yes, and off we went, and the trip was an absolute blast. Well, last summer, I suggested a new adventure to her. I suggested that we attempt to get hired as ride operators at our favorite amusement park, Knoebels, in Elysburg, Pennsylvania. And my idea was that we would commit 1 day a week to working there, and we'd see if they'd consider training and hiring us. And I knew it wasn't a conventional request, but I also knew they were having a very difficult time finding seasonal staff at that particular moment. So if this idea was ever going to fly, this seemed like the time. Also, I should probably mention that the park is 2.5 hours from our home, so this would require a 5-hour round trip every Monday for 13 weeks. And within 1 second of suggesting this to my daughter, Julia, she said, absolutely, I would love to do that. So we applied online. We drove up to the park for interviews. We got hired. We drove back another day for training, and our adventure began. The summer was filled with long drives, great conversations, and all kinds of fun experiences. We both worked in Kiddieland, where most of the riders are children under the age of 10. And that's a very fun age to work with. It's also a great group to work with because you get to interact with their families as well. We were also blessed with regular visits from friends and from family who would purposely visit the park on Mondays when we were there. I'm 46. My daughter is 17. And one of our biggest surprises as we worked there this past summer was the age of our coworkers. A few were high school and college age, but many were in their 70s and even their 80s. Several were in their 80s. That surprised me. And I asked them why they worked there. Some worked because they desperately needed to supplement their income. And so they did that. It was good seasonal employment. Others worked to combat boredom. One coworker, a woman who was in her 80s, said she worked there because she didn't have a family. And the park guests and the coworkers filled that void. I will admit that the days were long and most of the days were hot because this was in the middle of the summer. Most days were very tiring as well because of all the standing that was involved. Occasionally, not too often, but occasionally we had to handle difficult guests. But the experience was genuinely fun. And when the summer came to an end, I was very sad to say goodbye. So was Julia. I have no idea if this is an experience we'll repeat, but I'm glad we got to do it at least once. Working at the park was fantastic, but the time I was able to spend with my daughter was the best part of all, and I'm so glad she agreed to this adventure. On our final day, Nick, who was the man who hired us and he oversaw the rides department, he made a point to come and visit us at our stations, and he went out of his way to let Julia and I know how much they enjoyed having us on staff, and he hoped that we would apply to work there again in future years. So should we apply to do it one more time? I have no idea if we'll do it, but I have to say it was an experience we'll never forget. And I just received my tax statement from the park. So to let you know how this worked out for me financially, it tells me that for those 13 Mondays of employment, I was paid a total of $1,172.99. Now, the expenses I incurred for fuel, tolls, and meals came to $1,300 for a financial loss of $127.01. And to that I say, it was totally worth it.
Hi, Scott. This is Jenna, and wanted to share with you my experience one summer as a kid in summer camp. Summer camp used to be one of my favorite places in the world. It was a weekly overnight camp nestled up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, beautiful views, a ride on a lake, easy to make quick friends with the girls I was placed with. Most of the campers stayed in cabins, but us horseback girls got to stay in rooms off of the gym with a few bunk beds and plywood walls. It was just the best place. I loved everything about it. I loved horses and didn't get much of an opportunity to ride them during the year where I lived and really have access to them. So this particular day on a Wednesday when most of the other campers and the other programs were away from camp, we took the opportunity, having the camp mostly to ourselves, to take a trail ride. The intention that day was to go have a picnic up in a beautiful field, open field. And so in the morning, we were getting the horses ready, getting the tackle, getting the picnic and getting everything together. It was a very pretty, clear summer day. And as we were getting ready to mount up and get down the hill, I heard something that sounded like thunder. And at the time, I was more concerned about being rained out and not being able to go on our trail ride. But I didn't really think much more about that until later. But as we got down the hill and got to the trail, was located on the other side of the camp from the stables and behind the archery and riflery ranges. Trail was pretty narrow, so we went in line one by one, single file. Because I have had a little bit more experience than some of the other girls, I was up in the front of the line, and the trail was just beautiful, rays of sun coming down through the forest, quiet other than the sounds of summertime bugs, and just enjoying having the opportunity to be up in the mountains and riding my horse. And as we came around a bend, I saw something that was blocking the path, laying perpendicular, and from afar it looked like it was a branch that had fallen. But as we got closer, I made out clothes, camp khakis, the camp uniform, and it was a man. And I saw a rifle laying next to him and a pretty devastating gunshot wound to the head. I don't know how long I sat there before I said anything, just stopped the group and called the counselors up, and they called for help, and we turned around and headed back down to camp, confused and shocked and not really processing what we'd seen. I do remember that we had plenty of support from the young adults that were the counselors at the time, and camp administration came and talked to us. The camp director, actually, I had known from his baby was delivered at the hospital where my mom was an ICU nurse. So I knew the camp director. We were given the opportunity to call our parents and explain what had happened. And there was a full camp meeting that was held later, but terms of what happened were described very vaguely, which I now understand because this is a group of very young kids. And then over the years, I finished up that session. I didn't want to leave camp. I finished up the session and returned several summers later, up until the point where I was one of the oldest campers and would not be able to go back just as a regular camper. I think I was 15. And I was told a ghost story of what happened to that man. His name was Sterling Fight. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. But I guess I can understand why such a story would be passed around over time. But it comes up. I'm an adult now, close to 40. And every once in a while, I'll get hung up on it and I'll think about it. And I am very interested in true crime and always have been. And I think it's because I'm searching for the psychology. What was it behind it? What happened to him to make him decide to do that day, and why others do what they do. But I appreciate you letting me share, and I love the podcast, and I'm glad I found you.
Hi, Scott. This is Amelia, and I live in Ontario, Canada. I am dropping you a voice note to tell you about the time I went gorilla trekking in Rwanda. Back in 2010, I decided I needed to go on safari. I was inspired by a photography instructor that I had, and he had been on safari and shown me some of his photos. So I decided I was doing it. I was going to go. I called my amazing travel agent and told her I wanted to see gorillas in the wild before they were extinct, and she found the perfect trip for me. I actually went on a 3-week overland truck trip through Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. But this little side trip, if you will, to see the gorillas was separate from the organized trip that everyone was on. To see the gorillas in Rwanda, you have to apply to the government to get a permit. And only 56, at least this was in 2010. I don't know if the rules have changed. 56 people per day are granted these permits. And you have to show up on your specified given day at, I think it was 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning at the base of Volcanoes National Park. And this was kind of close to Ruhengeri, Rwanda. I get there on the day of. I'm by myself. I travel alone frequently. And it's explained that they're going to put us into, I forget now if it was 7 or 8 groups of people, but the groups were determined based on your fitness level. And those who were super fit would go the farthest distance to hike and see a particular family, whereas maybe some other people that had physical limitations or were, limited by their age or cardiovascular fitness would go to a family that was closer. Now, I had had a car accident, quite a bad one, actually, a couple of months after I booked my trip, but long before the trip actually happened. So I booked all of this and got my permit, but then I ended up having a back injury. And so for that reason, I ended up going in the quote easy group, and we had a really sort of lackadaisical experience. We just sort of had to hike up about, 25, 30 minutes. It was barely a hill. Really, really easy experience. I heard later in the day from the people that were in the tough group, they'd gone hiking up the mountain for about 3 hours with machetes cutting through sugarcane to get there. And I thought, wow, that doesn't sound like fun. Plus it's Rwanda, like it's hot, right? Anyway, they tell us that they're radioing ahead and they're finding out where the gorillas are, and they're tracking foodstuffs and like droppings and chewed leaves and figuring out where these families of gorillas are. Now, if you can picture this, you're in a single file line. Once you're in your group and you're assigned to X gorilla family, you walk in a straight file line. At the front of the line, there's a guard with a gun. Now, forgive my ignorance, but I'm Canadian. We don't do guns up here quite the same way that people do in the States. So I couldn't tell you what kind of gun it was, except that it was big, it was black, and it looked like something a soldier in the Army or the Navy or some Navy SEAL would carry or something. It was very intimidating. Then you have one of the guides that's got a radio, and they're, talking to other guides throughout the Volcanoes Park, trying to figure out where the gorillas are. And you have your 7 or maybe it was 8 people, I can't remember, tourists that are there with their permits. One or more of them may have had a Sherpa. I had a Sherpa carrying my photography equipment because of my back. And then at the end of the row, the end of your single file line, is another guard with another big scary gun. So we're going up the hill, up the mountain, and they find the gorillas, and they tell us they're coming just over the next crest, the next little hill, if you will. And sure enough, there they were. So you got to put everything down, and you approach very gently, and you find a place to sit. And basically, you kind of let the gorillas wander around you. Like no sudden movements, no eye contact. Obviously, you're not allowed to touch them or make any threatening gestures, nor would you want to. Like, hello, there's a silverback there. You'd be toast in about 4 seconds. But anyway, I found a spot to sit and settled in for the next 60 minutes of awestruck, amazing beauty. And let me tell you, you get exactly 60 minutes, not 61. Like they are very strict about not wanting these animals to be habituated to humans. So I'm sitting in the forest and I heard some rustling up above my head. And I looked up, and it was probably around 6 or 8 feet up above me. There was this little juvenile gorilla. I later found out from the guides that were there that day that he's estimated to be 2 years old. But he was up in the tree, and he was pulling the branches back, looking down at me. It was really cool. We just kind of had a moment where I didn't want to maintain eye contact, but I was looking at him and he was looking at me, and it was kind of cool. Anyway, I'm sitting there and I sort of, you sort of feel something in your peripheral area before you even see it in your peripheral vision. And I just sort of had this sense that something was really close by. So I very slowly turned my head to the right, and sure enough, I'm guessing it was the mom. I'm not sure, but there was another gorilla, and it was less than 2 feet away from me, sitting beside me. And if you had just looked at me from a distance, you wouldn't have been able to see it. It was camouflaged. It was hidden in the bushes. But I looked to my right and we made eye contact. So I very slowly picked up my camera and took one image with a 50 mil lens, just so I would be able to capture that moment. And to this day, I absolutely love that photo. It takes me right back to that moment, that minute, that experience, that feeling. And that is one of the top 10 days of my life. But here's where things get a little bit more interesting. So we finished our hour with the gorillas, and it's time to head back down. And I'm a polite young lady, so I wanted to tip the guides and the Sherpa and the guards. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit and say, back to the gun situation. I had some really strong feelings and reservations about the guns. I felt like it was my decision to apply for this permit and walk into this park and see these natural wild animals in their natural habitat. So if I get eaten by a gorilla or a lion or charged by an elephant, that's my fault. I absolutely did not want an animal to get hurt because of some stupid decision I made as a human. But I was told time and again that they were there to protect us because of the wild animals. So fine. We get back to the base and I have to go find my wallet. It's locked in a safe and go get money and, get stuff out and figure out what I'm giving to whom and everything. But it only took a few minutes, like maybe 5 minutes to go and do all of that. And I came back and the guards were gone. The guys with the guns, not just from my group, but from another group that had come back too. They were just completely gone. They'd been wandering around that morning at, 5:30 in the morning in plain sight, being assigned to different groups to go for hikes and stuff. But now, whoosh, completely and totally gone. So I went up to the guide who I had just spent the morning with. He led us up the mountain and brought us back down. He saw me with the gorillas. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm sure I have a photo of him somewhere. But anyhow, I gave him a tip and I asked him where the guys with the guns went. And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The guys with the guns that were protecting us from the animals." And he looked at me again and he said, "What are you talking about?" And for a split second, I thought, am I crazy? Was I imagining all of that? Like what's going on? What do you mean? What am I talking about? The guys with the big, huge guns that were dressed like soldiers, the one in the front, the one in the back. So I don't know what you're talking about. There's nobody with guns here. Just, it's over. And that was that. I mean, I just wanted to give them money, right? I wasn't going to tell them anything untoward. So it was the next day, I had decided because of my back that I was leaving the truck trip and striking out on my own. So I was going to stay at a hostel in Ruhengeri, Rwanda, and figure out the rest of the trip on my own without the itinerary of this company that was essentially turning their truck around and driving back to Nairobi. I didn't want to be on the truck anymore because the roads are terrible and my back was really, really, really problematic. So that's a story for another day. I found my own way back to Nairobi and it involved an airplane and a motorcycle and a guy with no legs. But anyway, I digress. I borrowed a copy of The Lonely Planet from someone at the hostel just to sort of see the region on paper and try to make some plans and figure out what was what. And that's when I think I found out what the secret of these guards with the guns might have been. If you look at a map of Rwanda and specifically Volcanoes National Park, you'll see that it borders the Congo, the DR. And there have been, at least remember this was 2010. So if things have changed, I don't know. But back then, there were still some significant issues with child soldiers in the DR attacking or holding hostage tourists for money, like ransom. And so I believe that those guys with the guns were not there for protection of animals, but rather to keep pirates at bay. And by the time we got back down to the bottom of the park, they dispersed because it's bad for business. They don't want people that come during the day inquiring about permits and visas to get an opportunity to see these gorillas, to see the guns with guards with guns. So that's my experience. I went gorilla trekking in Rwanda. If anybody gets a chance to go, please, please, please try to make it happen because you will not forget it. And it will be one of the most incredible experiences of your life. Stay cool, everyone.
Yeah, this is Scott again. This week's listener story is from me. This happened when we lived up in Maine. My daughter Bree was a young teenager at that time. And like most girls that age, she was kind of fascinated with certain celebrities. Her big heartthrob was Paul Walker. She was just in love with him. He was a really big star back then because he starred, along with Vin Diesel, in The Fast and the Furious, and the very first one of those. Now, as a little background on this, something you might not know about me, I don't remember if I've mentioned this at all on the podcast in the past, but back then, and this was like in the early 2000s, I owned a business called Celebrity Locators. I published a big book of addresses, like 8,000 addresses, where you could write to almost any celebrity to request an autographed photo. And I sold that book online along with a bunch of other celebrity-oriented merchandise. It was my first internet-based business, which I later sold. Anyway, as part of doing that kind of work, I had some connections and was able to get some authentic celebrity-related stuff. And one of the things I was able to find was one of the actual T-shirts that Paul Walker wore in that movie, The Fast and the Furious. So I bought it. Well, the movie came out on DVD in January of 2002, and Bree's 14th birthday was in February, so she invited some of her friends over for a sleepover that weekend. And at our house in Maine, we had turned the basement into a sort of a home theater with a big screen TV and actual movie theater seats that we got from a local theater that closed. So the plan was to have a birthday party, and then we rented the DVD of The Fast and the Furious, and they would watch it that night. So later on, the movie starts, but I kept the remote. And like 45 minutes or an hour into the movie, and right at a certain scene, I paused the movie. And the girls didn't understand why I did that. But I told them, hang on, we have to do something right now. And that's when I brought out this box wrapped up as a birthday present. And I told Bree that this was the time that she needed to open that gift. Well, she was still kind of confused, but okay, Dad does weird things sometimes. And when she opened the box and pulled out what seemed like just a random black T-shirt, she really had no idea what was going on. But then I told her, look at the screen where the movie's paused. See that T-shirt Paul Walker is wearing right there? Well, that's the actual T-shirt you're holding in your hand right now. And the reaction was probably what you'd expect. Bree and her friends thought that it was a pretty cool thing. Definitely made for an unusual birthday surprise.
Hi, Scott. First, I want to tell you I love your podcast. I went on maternity leave last January, and during nap time, I would binge all of your episodes. I learned of your podcast from This Is Actually Happening, and I am so glad that I did. I love the listener tales, and I just thought I'd never have anything to contribute, but then I remembered the night before my wedding, and it was quite a surprise for this type A personality girl. So let me just start by saying I'm a very organized person in my regular life, so you can imagine that leading up to my wedding day, I was pretty on top of every little detail and trying to get ahead of anything that I could possibly foresee happening. It was a very normal night before the wedding. We had our rehearsal dinner at a local restaurant with just a few of our closest friends and family members. Dinner ended around 9, and I was determined to get back to my room, shower, hop into bed as soon as possible. I was obviously so excited for the following day and worried that I would not be able to sleep because of it. So I just wanted to get to bed as early as possible so that I could catch as many hours of sleep as I could. Following tradition, the groom doesn't generally see the bride before the day of their wedding, so my now husband booked a separate room for the night before our wedding. The room I was going to be staying in was also connected to the presidential suite, which we also booked. So you know when you're in a hotel room with adjoining rooms, there's a door between them, just like that. So we booked it this way so that in the morning I could get ready in there with my girls and also have all of my getting ready items close by, jewelry, makeup, all that stuff. When we got home from the restaurant, I kissed my family goodnight, already excited to see him in the morning, and I headed up to my room. So I showered, I blew dried my hair, and headed into bed. I climbed into the clean white sheets, already starting to sleepily think of my beautiful wedding day in just a few hours. However, I noticed a dim light coming through under the adjoining door into the presidential suite, and I like to sleep in total darkness, so this definitely was going to be keeping me up, and I did not want that. So I got out of bed, I went through the adjoining door to the presidential suite, and slam. The door literally slammed behind me. I was not super concerned because, like I said, I booked both rooms, so obviously the door must be able to work both ways. I was wrong. It is locked from the inside of the presidential suite. So now here I am, trapped in the presidential suite on the night before my wedding. And if that's where the story ended, you could definitely sympathize that that's a pretty crappy situation. But I am going to make it just one level worse because the truth was that I was going to go to sleep naked. Meaning I had left the comfort of my room to go into the presidential suite to turn off that one light and had gotten trapped in there, completely naked and alone. I did not have my phone on me or my Apple Watch, so I could not call anyone. Immediately, my mind is reeling, and I am trying to calm myself down to think about how am I going to get out of this situation. I say this is a hotel room. There absolutely has to be a phone in this room. And to my great relief, there was, just on the other side of the room. So I sprint over to the phone, looking to call the front desk and ask for them to send someone up to rescue me. I pick up the receiver and nothing. There is no ringtone. There is no busy tone. There is nothing. I check the back of the phone. It is plugged in. I press a few numbers. It's just not working. Great. I remember that one of our groomsmen and his girlfriend booked the opposite adjoining room to the presidential suite. And even though I knew in my heart that he and his girlfriend were absolutely downstairs with my fiance drinking at the bar, I started banging on their door, hoping for one of them to come to my rescue. But same as with the phone, I was met with nothing but silence. So now the panic is truly starting to set in. My mind is racing, and I just keep saying to myself, this cannot be happening the night before my wedding. This absolutely cannot be happening. But I quickly snapped myself out of it and realized I absolutely could not just let this happen. I had to get back into my room. And in order to do so, I would have to leave this room, even though, again, I am completely naked. I started to look around the room. The presidential suite is much more like an office space with just a few couches and tables and a mini bar. It did have a closet though, and I know that hotel rooms usually keep a few extra blankets inside of them, right? So I look inside and unbelievably, I find a nice, huge, cushy blanket. I wrap it around myself and I start to think of a plan. What exactly am I going to do? Am I going to go down to the lobby wrapped in a blanket? Then I recalled that when I stepped out of the hotel elevator earlier that day, I saw that there was a decorative table in the elevator hallway with a phone on top of it. So that was my plan. I was going to exit the room, call for help, and I wedged a water bottle in the door because the last thing I needed was to get locked out of the presidential suite and stuck in the hallway with nothing but a blanket. So I ran to the table. To my relief, I found it, and I didn't make it up. There really was a phone on top of a table. I picked up the receiver, and nothing. Again, the phone was plugged into the wall, and it was not working. How could this be happening again? Now I am truly in full panic. I am all out of ideas, and my only possible next step would be to make the humiliating trip from my floor to the lobby in a literal hotel blanket and nothing else, and ask them to open my door for me. Mere seconds after my defeat in realizing the phone did not work, tears literally streaming down my face, mourning the sleep I will not be getting, and already embarrassed by what I will have to do next, I hear ding, and the elevator doors open. Our groomsman, Anthony, exited the elevator. His expression was first confused and then immediately concerned, because why would he be finding his best friend's fiance in such an erratic state in the hallway of a hotel? I grabbed him and I told him what happened, and he immediately ran back downstairs to get our card and let me back into my room. I was so thankful that he showed up when he did, and I still honestly can't believe that any of that happened or that he was there to rescue me, thankfully, at that exact moment. What's even funnier is that the chaos did not end there. I woke up in the morning of our wedding day, and all of my girls are in the room, and my mother-in-law show up, and my mom shows up, and the bellhop is in there, and, you know, he's removing all of the dresses from the bellhop, whatever that thing is that they carry. And I asked my mom, I was like, I see your dress. Where is my dress? And she nearly fainted when she realized that it's the one thing that she left at home. So my dad came to the rescue and drove all the way home to get it and back to the hotel. Later on, we had another lockout faux pas when the photographer took pictures in my room and then, like I did, got locked in the presidential suite. This time I had my key to get back into the hotel room, so I exited the presidential suite. I walked around to the hotel room. I swiped my card and beep, it was being declined. I called down to client services. They send up a master key and beep again. The master key was being declined. At this point, I'm just laughing because I'm like, this has got to be some sort of sick joke that somebody is playing on me. They literally had to call an engineer to come upstairs to let me back into my room, which, by the way, was vitally important because my wedding dress was in there, my wedding shoes, the jewelry, everything was in there. Thankfully, though, that was the end of all of the unplanned craziness. My then fiance and now husband went on to get married, and it was without question the best day ever. I will never forget a moment of that day, including the chaos leading up to it, and I cherish it. I got to marry my best friend, surrounded by family and friends, and we danced the night away and had the best music and the best food. We have now been happily married for 4 years, almost 4 years. We have a beautiful 1-year-old and a perfect little dog. Now all we do is look back and laugh at the uniqueness of our day and remember it very fondly. So just want to say thank you, Scott, for taking the time to listen to my story. And to the brides and grooms out there planning a wedding, just remember you can only plan so much, and to go with the flow. It always, always works itself out in the end.
Hi, Scott. I am a recent listener of your show. I discovered it a couple of, maybe like 2 months ago. I absolutely love it. I've been binging it. And I was recently listening to the episode about Adam who fell off the cliff. And one of the things that he said was that his incident happened on April 1st. And it reminded me of this story. When I was really little, I wasn't old enough to remember it, but my dad took lots of videos, so I've seen it. On April 1st, my mom was on the phone with my dad, who was at work, and she all of a sudden exclaimed, "Oh my God, my mother's car just blew up." And my dad, was like, "What, honey, what?" And my mom had already hung up the phone. She was in the process of calling 911 at the time. My grandmother's car was in our driveway about maybe 8 feet from our garage and house, so it was pretty close. So my dad's just at work in his office, just wondering, what the hell just happened? So he sets the phone down, he hangs it up, he looks at his coworker, and he says, "My wife just told me that her mother's car blew up in front of her, right at our house. It's April Fool's Day. If she calls and tells me April Fool, I'm gone and tell her I'm going to kill her when I get home." It was not a prank, but my dad was very well known for making lots of April Fool's Day pranks, so he thought it was. When he got to the house, he saw that the car was in fact on fire. There were several fire trucks there already. And, he decided that he had just gotten his brand new camera at the time. So he took it out. He started filming. He filmed the fire department putting out the fire. My grandmother had just gotten a full tank of gas. So there was a lot of fire that had to burn out, naturally and everything. He got a lot of footage of it. And eventually the fire department ended up contacting him and asking for the footage for training. So, April Fool's Day, but it wasn't a joke. Love the podcast. Can't wait to hear more. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christy, and this is my family's experience. In the summer of 2006, my husband and I and 2 of our 3 daughters went to a family ranch resort, which was adjacent to Zion National Park in southern Utah. Our middle daughter was 20 and our youngest daughter was 11. My husband was a cowboy, a team roper, and had lived on a ranch, so this was right up his alley. We stayed in one of the rustic cabins, ate cowboy meals, and signed ourselves up for horseback riding, zip lining, shooting, etc. My husband had been shooting guns most of his life, and he was particularly excited about this excursion because now his family members would have the chance to shoot. At the appointed time, we climbed into a big van along with another family that we did not know. Our driver was a young man about the age of 19 who went by his camp name of Potato. There was a lot of chatter amongst riders in the van as we headed up a narrow road along the side of a mountain with a steep canyon below. It was sunny and warm, and all of us were dressed for a hot summer day. Potato pulled into a cleared area where there was a small outbuilding, and we all got out of the van. He grabbed the loaded shotguns and handed them out. There wasn't a thing said about safety, where anyone should stand or not walk. There were some young kids, and nothing was mentioned about how to fold the shotgun and where not to point it. It made me terribly nervous, and I made certain that our 11-year-old was either with me or my husband. We were shooting skeet, and before long, a sudden storm hit, and the rain began. This is not necessarily unusual for southern Utah, but we had not been forewarned and were not prepared for a downpour. After about 5 or 10 minutes, when the rain was then coming down in buckets, Potato told us to go wait it out in the little outbuilding. So the two families piled in there with massive amounts of heavy mud on our shoes. After a while, when it appeared that the storm was not going to let up, Potato instructed us to get back in the van for the trip down the mountain. My husband sat in the front passenger seat, the other family adults in the next row. I was seated between each of my daughters on the next row, and the children from the other family were on the back row. As Potato started to turn the van toward the road, it was sliding all over the place. This soil had a very high clay content, and when wet, was extremely heavy and slick. As Potato drove, the van slid everywhere, worse than my experiences of driving in snow, and he continued to pick up speed. We would slide right next to the edge of the cliff, and at one point, the van spun 180 degrees, coming to a stop headfirst into a tree on the very edge of the cliff. The other adults were telling him to slow down, but instead he went faster and faster. There was a lot of talking, yelling, singing going on as we tried to cope with the fear we felt that we might very well go off the side of this mountain. My daughter to my left was praying aloud. My younger daughter to my right was crying. When I feel that kind of fear, I get very, very quiet so I can focus and concentrate on keeping myself together. The kids behind us were very loudly singing a church hymn, "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning." It was fearful chaos in that van. I finally yelled up to Potato to slow down, saying if he didn't, I was going to get out. I made eye contact with my husband, and he seemed to be just as calm and relaxed as could be. With all the sliding and near misses of going over the edge, we arrived back at the resort. Potato explained that because of the type of soil on the road, the only way he could keep the van moving was to speed up so that the mud would fly off the tires. Otherwise, they would cause the van to be completely stuck in the mud. I was so frightened and so angry that I really didn't care about his explanation. He had put me and my family and another family in danger, and I was determined to let someone know about it. You don't go to a family resort thinking that you're going to fly off a cliff and die. I asked my husband why he was so calm during all of it, and he replied, I knew everything was going to be okay. We were signed up for another activity upon our return, but we were all covered in that thick and heavy mud. I was in no mood to just walk off and have fun. I was still shaking with fear and anger. I eventually calmed down enough to watch the girls on the zip line, but I was going to have a very hard time enjoying myself for the rest of our stay. I later ran into the family that had been in the van with us, and they told me that they had taken their quad up the mountain road, and they showed me pictures of the van's tracks stopping right at the edge of the cliff. It was horrifying proof of us nearly flying off the edge to our deaths. Then later in the evening, we were in the pool when the lightning struck near us. Out we came. We were actually looking forward to our trip home. Upon our return, I wrote a long, detailed letter to both the resort manager and the owner. I wanted them to understand not only how dangerous it was as we slid down that mountain, but why hadn't there been any safety rules surrounding the shooting excursion? I let them know just how frightened we had all been and felt like they needed to make some changes if this was going to be a safe and pleasant experience for others. Rather than call or email me about it, they actually drove to our home, which was 4 hours away. They sat in my living room and apologized for what had happened, and then proceeded to outline the changes that they had already made and the changes that were in the works. They had made safety rules regarding the shooting excursion and had plans for putting rock on the road up the mountain. But in the meantime, the minute the rain starts, the van drivers are to get everyone in the van and down the mountain before it gets dangerous. They invited us to come stay again at their expense. I honestly feel a little shaky even recounting this. Other than some pretty harrowing medical experiences, this was the closest I'd ever come to losing my life. The thought of that van filled with 11 people careening off the side of the mountain and smashing hundreds of feet in the canyon below was just too much to consider. We never did make a return visit, not because we didn't want to, but it just never worked in our schedules.
Hi, Scott. My name is Cecilia, and I love your podcast. And I just wanted to share this story because every time I tell friends or anything like that, it always gets a good reaction. So I thought maybe you or the listeners might enjoy. And I will preface it with saying it may be triggering to some people who have had bad experience with being drugged or drugs in general. And I also want to say I was in an incredibly safe situation. My life was never in danger. I was with my family the whole time, and everything was totally fine. This is the story of the time I got drugged with meth. So I was with my family out of town at a very Christian wedding of a family friend of ours. My family didn't grow up super religious. We went to church every once in a while, but it was never very serious. And this was a very traditional, very devoted Christian wedding, I'll say. Like their first kiss was their I do kiss, and everyone there was very straight-laced for the most part. They didn't have any hard alcohol, just wine and beer. And yeah, pretty much everyone was quite straight-laced aside from our table of family friends and stuff that were a little bit, I wouldn't say we're crazy or anything, but there was a group of us that was more delinquent than the rest. So some of my friends, or family friends, brought in little shooters of hard alcohol. And we were definitely the odd man out there of the very Christian environment that we were in. And so from my perspective, I remember the first set of the band and nothing really after that. I have 3 flashes of memory. One is me looking at myself in the bathroom thinking, I only drank wine. Like, how did I get this drunk? I didn't drink that much wine. The second one is me running around as fast as I can, trying to pick up all the bouquets of flowers from the table after the band had stopped to help clean up when everybody was leaving. I don't know why I was doing that. And the last one is me in bed in a ball, naked, crying with my sisters, trying to make me put clothes on. And so from my family's perspective, the band played 3 sets. And after about the first set, I started going crazy on the dance floor. And you all don't know me, but I'm pretty reserved and I'm shy. I'm not a big dancer. I don't really, I'm kind of in the background. I'm pretty shy. And so they saw me on the dance floor with my fists pumping and my jaw clenched and looking like must have been having fun, but looking like a crazy person. And they were like, what is up with Cecilia? Like, we have never seen her like this before. And my stepmom almost immediately was like, she's on drugs. Like, she's definitely on drugs. That's not normal. And so they kind of honed in their focus on me. We got through the night and got back to our Airbnb at the time. And they were asking me, what did you take? What did you do? I was like, I didn't do anything. I'm just drunk. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I just drank wine. And eventually I started crying because they were asking me a lot of questions. And, I was on meth. So I was a little emotional. And I wouldn't stop crying until my sister threw pizza on the ground. And that made me laugh for a second. And then I started crying again. And I didn't know why I was crying. And it was very emotional. And I got through the night. My family, clothed me and wiped away my tears and did as best as they could. And then I got back to New York where I was living at the time. And I took a drug test when I got back and I had methamphetamine and MDMA in my system. So my best guess is that somebody else had Molly water in their wine or some sort of liquid Molly in their wine or something. And I actually drank someone else's wine. And I ended up being cut with meth. I don't know how I got meth in my system. But anyways, weeks go by and then I see the couple post their wedding photos on a Facebook album. And I was like, oh gosh. So I looked through the Facebook album and there I am, lo and behold, on meth in the background of all these wedding photos. I look absolutely ridiculous. I'm like jaw clenched, eyebrows furrowed, like arms up, looking like a person on meth. You would imagine they would look. So yeah, that's how I ended up being on meth in probably one of the last places you want to accidentally be on meth at. And yeah, I tried meth just once, and I don't think I'll ever do it again. Not on purpose, at least. Thanks for listening. I love your podcast. Keep doing what you're doing.
Picnic. I find myself hungry in the middle of Newton, Massachusetts. As I leave the McDonald's with my bag of burgers and fries, I ask a passerby where I can find a nice place to have my lunch outdoors. He directs me to the banks of the pond in front of nearby Newton City Hall. As I walk away, he says something cryptic. If you're lucky, you may get to see a real good show. Not knowing what he means, I envision teenagers making out in their cars. When I park facing forward in the City Hall lot overlooking the pond, I can see a number of picnickers sitting on their blankets at the edge of the water. Some of them also have McDonald's bags. As I look to my left and right, it seems that the people sitting in their cars on either side of me are in a state of high expectation. The scene is idyllic. It's a perfect soft summer's day outside the Georgian Revival City Hall with its Greek temple-style portico and Corinthian columns. Just the slightest breeze ruffles the water, and picnickers are lunching on the newly cut grass by the pond's edge. Then, to complete this summer pastoral, a flock of Canada geese in a V formation paddles across the pond toward the picnickers. I could be looking at a 19th century John Constable English landscape painting, possibly entitled Summer's Peace. As the geese pick up speed crossing the water, some of the onlookers in the cars around me start to toot on their horns, and all eyes are on the banks of the pond. I still haven't caught on yet. The guy in the car next to me jumps out, yelling and waving his arms to warn the people of something. But he's also smiling. They all ignore him, thinking probably he's some sort of a nut job. Then things happen fast. The lead goose reaches the edge of the pond, runs up the embankment toward the nearest picnickers, with his wings spread wide and his big black bill open, hissing at his targets. The family jumps up in complete disarray. The wife and one kid tumble sideways as the big goose steals their lunch, gulping down their burgers and fries. Now I understand why the occupants of the surrounding cars were in such a state of readiness. Meanwhile, the rest of the flock makes short work of the other picnickers. I can't help but laugh at this scene of pastoral carnage. As they retreat, some of the panicked picnickers still have their napkins tucked into their waistbands. A few are crying, some are smiling, and all the onlookers are laughing hysterically. The lead goose is now digging through one of the overturned picnic baskets, looking for more food. I drive out of the parking lot, marveling at how this serene summer scene turned into complete chaos in the wink of an eye, and appreciate a good laugh. It occurs to me that for the onlookers, this is a regular daily event. I guess that if no one was really hurt, why not just enjoy the show?
I'm dating a mule packer in Yosemite National Park, one of the most special places on Earth. Spending a lot of time visiting her outdoor office over the summer. It's been an absolutely amazing year, but one thing that I'm a little disappointed about is that it's October and I haven't seen a bear yet. Someone always sees one the day before I arrive or the day after I leave. I feel like I'm always just missing them. One evening in October around sunset, someone in the distance yells, "Get out of here!" And my girlfriend comes over to me all out of breath and says, "Jeremy, there is a bear in the corral trying to eat the grain for the mules." I run over and the other packers said that they just scared it away and pointed me in the direction that it went. I stop running and cautiously take a trail in the direction of where they said the bear went. Still light enough to clearly see my surroundings, and there's a large field beside the trail with a good vantage point. I walk about 1/8 of a mile with low expectations, and what do you know? On the edge of the field beside some trees is a black bear I'm so happy and excited to finally see a bear in Yosemite. Black bears are naturally active during the day, but in areas with a lot of human activity, they become nocturnal or crepuscular, meaning they are most active in the evenings and early mornings in an attempt to avoid humans. I'm on a trail a good 200 or 300 yards from the bear. She is not reacting to me at all, which is a good sign. If a wild animal is reacting to my presence at all, that means I need to get back and respect their space. Could this moment get any better? Turns out it could and does, because the bear has 2 cubs with her, the cutest little boogers ever. They're playing clumsily pretty close to her as she scavenges a crabapple tree. I'm speechless with just a huge smile on my face. A few hikers pass me, and I don't even point out the bears. They just keep moving along the trail completely oblivious. How many bears have I passed in my life without even noticing them myself? After about half an hour of observing the bears from the trail, I noticed for the first time the mother was looking at me. More than looking at me, she was glaring at me and not moving at all. This was new. Even though she was a few hundred yards away, her body was squared off in my direction and glaring. It's interesting with animals, they don't speak English, but they can send a message crystal clear when they need to. And this message was that she wanted to kill me. As I was asking myself, why would she all of a sudden, I heard a branch break behind me. I quickly looked for the cubs. One of the cubs was right next to the mother. I didn't have to look behind me to know that the second cub was what made that branch break. And I didn't want the mama to see me looking at the cub, so I didn't even turn around. This was it. This is the thing you're not supposed to do. It's literally in the Bible. Don't get between a mother bear and her cubs, ever, or you will die. She rears up onto her hind legs and came down onto her front legs and grunted as she hit the ground. I literally felt the ground shake, seriously like an earthquake. The instant her front paws hit the ground, I could see the cub next to her scramble up a tree. I could also hear the cub behind me scrambling up a tree. Things were getting real. She was still holding that death stare towards me, but was not running towards me, which was good. I started walking slowly sideways in the direction that was going away from the mother and the cub in the tree behind me. I was kind of walking sideways away from both of them. It's bad to run or turn your back on a predator, so I kept facing the mother and slowly picked up my speed while walking kind of sideways backwards, but in a way that was not trying to look panicked. But in my mind, I'm saying, please don't kill me, Mama Bear. Please don't kill me, Mama Bear. She didn't react to me moving away, which I think is a good thing. I kept going, but never turned my back to her. It was getting darker now, and after a few hundred yards, I told myself that if she hasn't started chasing me, she probably won't. Unless she was giving me a head start, doesn't matter. I just kept going and kept breathing and kept facing her direction until eventually I couldn't really see her. I got back to camp, but the adrenaline pulsing through my body didn't calm down for hours. After never seeing a bear in Yosemite, I then went on to see a dozen more the next morning along that same trail in the valley. Since this close call, I've become fascinated with bears and other wild predators and started interviewing survivors of wild animal attacks in an attempt to understand and educate others on how to peacefully coexist in the wilderness. My name is Jeremy Carberry, and it's an honor to be a small part of the What Was That Like podcast.
My name is Chloe. I'm a longtime listener. I love your show, love your content, love everyone who contributes their stories. It's been such a blast listening as the years have gone on. So thank you for everything you do. I thought I might share a little bit about something that happened to me when I was in middle school. In middle school and high school, I was growing up in the suburbs of Seattle, specifically Woodinville. It's now a very touristy kind of wine town, but at the time it was very like semi-rural, just lots of horses, lots of open space. And so, yeah, I grew up riding horses competitively. I loved it. I was very socially awkward, was not very athletically inclined. And so riding horses just really scratched that itch for me. It made me feel like I could work towards things, accomplish things. I had great coaches. It was just a win-win-win. I wasn't able to own a horse at the time, so I just kind of semi-leased a couple for different show seasons. The one this particular year I was leasing was named Colette. She was a part quarter horse, part thoroughbred. She's about 15 years old, I want to say, and she was just lovely. We really vibed. So we went into this particular show season. I did hunter jumping, so that meant we would do several different courses and we would get scored on a point basis for each course. There were 3 in an event, and then at the end, all those points would be calculated to figure out sort of who got grand champion, reserve champion, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, blah, 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 blah. And so we had been doing super well this particular day before my 8th grade year. I was so excited. I was having so much fun. And we go into this third course. You're basically given the course a couple minutes before you're supposed to go on. You have to look at the chart. Then you look at the actual way the jumps are configured, on the ground. And you have to sort of eyeball it and figure out your strides and your plan of attack, essentially. So I did that and I talked it over with my coach and I thought it through and I said, yeah, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. So we went in, we did our little opening circle like you're supposed to do, where you sort of show off. And then we got into the course and we were doing great until this 2-jump sequence where I miscalculated the number of strides that should have been between the first jump and the second jump. I thought that it was only going to take a landing stride, in between stride, I guess, and then a takeoff stride. But really, there should have been another one in between there. And so I knew it once we were in the middle of those jumps. My horse Colette knew it, but she was still listening to me and I couldn't back out because I had already cued her. And so we were just like, well, let's hope this works. So she took this enormous jump. She had to throw her head back a lot further than she normally would have if it had been a normal jump. And so when she threw her head back further, she hit me in the face because of the way I was positioning my body to go over the jump. And so I fell sideways off of her. We're taught to sort of unhook our legs from the stirrups so that we don't break our ankles if we're falling. So I did that. And I just fell off to the left side of her. As she kept going over the jump, I fell on top of the jump and all my wind got knocked out of me. Instantly, my first thought was I was just pissed because if you fall, you're disqualified. And I thought that we could have cleaned up the whole thing. We were doing so well. My second thought was that I was worried about her because she's just running around. Horses have very strong emotions. So she came kind of trotting up to me with her head hanging low, thinking she had done something wrong when really it was me. And so I collected her. I was trying to kind of comfort her. I was gimping off of this course. Everyone's sort of pity clapping me. I was just pissed because, this was the last show of the season, the last day of the events, and I had blown it. And I was sore and it just sucked, And so then I got home. My family's sort of Sunday night tradition was to all pile into my parents' room and watch Survivor with ice cream. So we were doing that. There was a commercial break. I tried to get up to use the restroom and I could not move. So it turns out I fractured 2 of my vertebrae, slipped 2 of my discs, and I had to wear a back brace for the most socially awkward year of my life in 8th grade. On top of that, I had some kind of allergic reaction between the pain medicine and another medicine I had already been taking that caused my top lip to blow up like Kardashians gone wrong and caused me to break out in hives. And so that also happened to be on the day of our first 8th grade dance. And so I sat in an oatmeal bath the entire day with an ice pack on my lip, taking Benadryl, just loopy beyond belief. And my mother, bless her heart, did everything in her power to get me into my corduroy Hollister skirt and iridescent star printed t-shirt so that I could go to this dance. And I made it. But that was a rough year of physical therapy and a back brace and not being able to have that athletic outlet that I had loved for so long. Finally, I was able to get back up on the, not only the proverbial, but the literal horse the following spring, a little bit less than a year after my accident. But that was a very tough time. 0 out of 10, do not recommend breaking your spine when you are 13 years old.
I was harassed by a murderer. Basically, it starts out as my husband's story. When my husband was 5 years old, his dad was a police officer. And what had happened was there was two men, a father and a son. I'm going to call them the old man and the young man for this story. But an old man and a young man had gotten into a fight with their neighbor over an old bicycle, of all things. There had been some sort of an altercation with the neighbor. The police came and arrested the old man, and on his way into jail, he said that he had chest pains, and they took him to the hospital. While he was in the hospital, he managed to escape with the help of his son. So the old man and the young man gather up a bunch of guns and basically barricade themselves inside their house. The police there called upon my husband's dad to come help because he had had plenty of run-ins with these guys. They thought maybe that he could talk some sense into them and bring them in to, have them be arrested and no further problems. But that is not what happened, unfortunately. While my husband's dad and his fellow police officer were trying to approach the house, they opened fire on them. There was a shootout. Both the police officers were shot, and my husband's father was killed. It was a tragic, senseless murder. Very sad. Like I said, my husband was only 5 years old. He hardly has any memories of his father. But both the father and son, the old man and the young man, were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The old man died when my husband was in high school. After I got married to my husband, and of course I learned this story, I was curious and I, did some research about this case and read old news articles and court transcripts, et cetera. And in looking for this information, I ran across a YouTube channel, and this YouTube channel was hosted by a man who would take phone calls from prisoners who felt that they were unjustly convicted and would basically record these phone conversations and then broadcast them out on the YouTube channel. And at the time, it was quite a popular YouTube channel with lots of subscribers and lots of comments. And the younger man had made many YouTube videos with this gentleman proclaiming that he was innocent, that he had the right to defend his home and property by shooting the police officers, and was saying very, very inflammatory things about my husband's family. They were from a very small town where everybody knew everyone, but was saying some really terrible things about my husband's father and his family that were just untrue. People have the right to their opinion, but they don't have the right to say things that are just patently false. So I made the mistake of commenting on this YouTube video. Little did I know that I was opening a huge Pandora's box, but this is probably not the last time that my big mouth is going to get me in trouble. It certainly isn't the first either. But I basically just said something about saying this is absolutely false. Anybody can look up the court transcripts. They're public record. These things that he's saying are not true. That caused a firestorm. There were, he continued to make more YouTube videos, really started kind of pointing his ire towards me directly, and then started making some threats. Made some threats against my husband, against his mother, against his family, and called upon the fans of this YouTube page to find out everything that they could about me. And I ended up being doxxed. And what being doxxed means is that people find all your personal information, where you work, where you live, your phone number, et cetera, et cetera. I ended up getting hundreds of phone calls. I got death threats to my job. It was really scary. I called the prison that he was at and said, certainly there's something that you can do. It turns out they they're allowed to make phone calls. They can call whoever they want, and they're not in charge of this, man that runs the YouTube channel. So they really couldn't do much, but they, obviously he's not allowed to make threats against, his victims and their families. So he was put in the SHU, or solitary confinement, several times. Finally, I did end up filing a restraining order personally. Once I filed that restraining order, I could not any longer make any sort of comments on the YouTube channels. I couldn't try to talk to him directly at all, which of course I didn't. It did simmer things down a little bit when he had gone to the SHU several times and when I made that restraining order, but it certainly didn't stop him. He did continue to call into that show quite often and make some, really thinly veiled, threats against our family. But it did finally stop. And the reason why I've got some mixed feelings about, he ended up getting tongue cancer. So he kept calling in, but he became more and more unintelligible as time went on. The comments really stopped on the videos because people couldn't tell what he was saying. He kept calling in for about a year and finally just stopped because nobody could understand a word that he was saying. So, like I said, I've got some complicated feelings about that, but all in all, I guess I would say karma's kind of a you-know-what. So, I don't know. That's my weird story, Scott. Please keep it up on TikTok. Man, you're so fun on there. You are the king of dad jokes, and keep it up with the podcast. I think you're great.
Hi, Scott. I wanted to share a story with you that happened recently. A couple months ago, my dad was terminally ill with cancer and was in palliative care. I visited him every day and we shared stories and memories the entire time until he was too fatigued to be able to communicate anymore. Before that time, I told him about a story that I had read on Reddit. It was about a young man with his father who was also terminally ill, and they created a pact that when the father died, he would come back and send a message to the son. They came up with the plan that the dad would somehow tell the son that his leg hurt. So fast forward a few months later and the dad has passed away and the son is at a nightclub. He's not really drinking that much. He's awake, he's alert. And someone comes up and approaches him and says, "I'm so sorry to bother you. We don't know each other, but I had this overwhelming urge to tell you that my leg hurts." So, of course, cue the son bursting into tears, feeling, hey, that's my dad. He's communicating with me from the afterlife. So I tell this story to my dad, and I think he kind of brushes it off. He's not really listening. And of course, he's tired too. So we come up with our own pact, and I say, okay, Dad, when you pass, if you can send me a sign in the form of your favorite movie, which I know what it is, then I will know that is a sign that you're okay. And I will also go ahead and watch your favorite movie because I've never seen it before. So he agrees, and I don't really know if he's listening, but, he goes with it. So fast forward about 4 weeks later, and he has passed away. He passed away on a Wednesday night, and on Thursday morning, my cousins and family were over at his house with me, and we're just kind of sharing our own stories of him. Before he passed, I had been making an effort to go through his house, tidying and cleaning everything, but remembered that there was one box of family items that I hadn't yet opened. So my cousin and I sat on the floor and decided to open this box that was filled with different china items from my grandparents. They were all wrapped up in newspaper, and the first item that I picked up, I opened out the newspaper to look at the item, but my eyes averted to what was in the middle of the newspaper, which was an advertisement for my dad's favorite movie. The newspaper had been wrapping that china for probably about 30 years, so it wasn't anything recent. And what I found particularly amusing about this was that on the newspaper, it said, "Last days must finish Wednesday," as far as the viewing. And again, he passed on a Wednesday.
Hi, Scott. My name is Erica McDonald. I love your show, and I thought I'd send in a listener tale. I grew up in Sea Isle City, New Jersey, which is a beach town in Cape May County, and my father had a real estate company called Frida Real Estate. So he sold homes, and he was also the commissioner of our town for many years. One day when I was working in our family store, it's a 5 and dime called Sam's Department Store, a man and his daughter walked in. He had recently bought a house from my father, and he needed to get keys duplicated for his new home. And we had a key cutting machine in my dad's store. So he walked in with his daughter on his hip, and I said to him, "That is just the most adorable little girl I've ever seen. What is her name?" And he said, "Her name is Taylor." And I said, "Well, if you ever need a babysitter, I also babysit." He said, "Well, actually, this weekend we do need a babysitter." So I started babysitting for Scott and Andrea and their 2 children, Taylor and Austin, every summer from the time Taylor was probably about 3 till she was maybe 6 years old. And then they moved to a different shore town. But we still kept in touch with the family because Scott was also a financial advisor and he was helping my family out with their finances. So throughout the years, we kept in touch with this family. And Scott would keep us updated on the kids and what they were up to. And his daughter loved to sing. And he would tell us, so Taylor's going to be singing the national anthem at the local sports arenas. And she's going to be singing the national anthem at our local community. And we just thought that was so sweet. And we were so excited for them. And then one day he called and told us that they were going to move to Nashville, Tennessee. And we thought, why in the world would you move to Nashville, Tennessee? Your daughter is, just a karaoke kind of singer. And it turns out she wasn't. She became the biggest pop star in history, and it is Taylor Swift. So that's my listener tale. What was it like to babysit the biggest pop star in the entire world? Well, they paid $5.25 an hour, and the kids were pretty good. But I never did get a ticket to any of her shows. I never got a backstage pass, and I certainly never got front row seats. And I actually couldn't even get a ticket in the Philadelphia show. That's my story. I hope you enjoy it.
On October 21st, 2019, I woke up feeling good. It was my favorite month. I had just quit my barista job 2 days before, and I had new job interviews lined up that were related to my arts management degree from College of Charleston, where I graduated from the previous May. I was still living in Charleston, South Carolina, but that day I had to drive down to Myrtle Beach to take care of some errands with my mom. I had a nice 2-hour drive, and when I arrived, we went to lunch and then went to the Sprint store as we both needed new phones. As the Sprint employee is explaining our options, I begin to feel odd. My anxiety kicks in a bit, but before I can get any more worried, I begin to see ripples in my vision. At this point, I excuse myself and go out and sit in the car. The ripples go away, but a headache settles in. I call and talk to my roommates, and they say maybe I'm just tired or dehydrated. My mom handles our phones and then drives us home. I take an Advil and nap for a couple of hours, and when I wake up, decide I feel a bit better and I'd like to sleep in my own bed, so I get in the car and start my drive back to Charleston. Halfway through, I momentarily lose the use of my right arm and leg. I couldn't even process the way it felt. I pull over at a Dollar General and go inside, splash some water on my face, and buy a Gatorade. But as I'm talking to the cashier, I get the bizarre notion that the words coming out of my mouth don't really match the thoughts in my head, but I can't be sure, so I continue driving home. Once I get home, I tell my roommates I'm going to lie down again. When I wake up around 8 p.m., my roommate had texted me, and as I reply, I can't quite write what I'm trying to say, and the sentences I send are incomplete or jumbled. Eventually, my sentences become more complete, and I text my best friend, Aika, and ask her if I can stay the night at her house, particularly because she had an extra bed in her room, which made me feel safer if I started to feel worse through the night. Aika picks me up, we eat dinner at her house, and chit-chat for a while. We agree that it's probably just my anxiety causing all of these symptoms, and I go to sleep feeling completely normal. The next morning, which also happened to be Aika's birthday, we wake up and she says she's going to class, but she'll be back shortly in case I'm not feeling well and would like to go get checked out by a doctor for good measure. I try to respond to her, but realize I can't form a complete sentence, and when she brings me a glass of water, I can't lift it to my mouth without spilling it everywhere. At this point, Aika says she's taking me to the hospital now instead of later. After stumbling to the bathroom and being guided down the stairs, I try to put my shoes on, but struggle to the point that I'm lying down. Aika decides it will be too hard to get me to the hospital, so she calls 911. When they arrive, they try asking me when the symptoms started, and I respond tomorrow instead of yesterday. They have me take some deep breaths and take my pulse, and comment that they just think I'm having a panic attack, and that my blood pressure is normal. They have a choice between 2 nearby hospitals and choose one at random. When we get there and a doctor comes in, he's uncomfortably jovial and chuckles when I'm unable to shake his hand because I don't have control of mine. He runs no simple tests for someone with my symptoms and tells Aika and I that sometimes severe anxiety can cause these symptoms. They hook me up to an IV of Ativan and tell Aika I'll be fine. But luckily, she had called my mom, who was on her way from Myrtle Beach by this point. When I woke up after the Ativan, I was coherent enough to read my mom's texts, but not to walk or talk. They ask if they should call me an Uber, and I express in my best broken sentences that my mom is on the way. They decide to wheel me into the waiting room where finally, my mom is able to find me after searching when the front desk said they were unsure where I was. I can't lift my head up, say very much, or use my hand, and my mom is startled by my condition. She goes back and finds the doctor, who refuses to run any tests and assures my mom that this is just an anxiety attack. My mom takes me to my apartment for about 30 minutes, but ultimately decides something isn't right and takes me to the other hospital. They immediately admit me and run every test possible: MRIs, heart ultrasounds, and more. Time passes, and in the middle of the night, they let us know their conclusion: an ischemic stroke with the blood clot being caused by the dissection of my carotid artery. Obviously, not normal for someone my age, at 22 years old. The doctors have remained undecided about the cause of the carotid artery dissection, despite being tested for various genetic disorders and autoimmune diseases, so for now, I take a daily 325 milligram aspirin and have regular checkups. It was a long road to recovery. The first few days in the hospital, it was tough to answer simple questions like what month it was and what my name was. After a couple of weeks, I was moved to a rehabilitation center to learn how to walk, talk, and write again. And while I still struggle with various effects like brain fog, occasional headaches, and my hand not being able to write quite as fast as my brain wants it to, I'm lucky that my brain recovered as well as it did, and I'm able to live a great, fulfilling life thanks to the doctors, family members, and friends that took my symptoms seriously and got me the help that I needed.
I thought I'd share a simple yet heartfelt moment that happened to me about a year ago that stuck with me till today. It's a story where the universe and nature came together to create this perfect picture that changed what should have been a regular moment to such a beautiful one. I was traveling in Yunnan, China, on a tour group with a good friend and travel buddy. It was a hot summer's day, and we were walking up a hill, sweating and really quite uncomfortable. It had been a long, long day, and I tuned out to spend that walk in silence. I had my music plugged in, trying hard to ignore the discomfort I was feeling in that moment. I remember thinking on repeat, "You're supposed to enjoy this, Jen. Why is it so difficult? Get out of your head and feel the moment." My friend was right next to me, shuffling around with his heavy backpack. Something must have pressed up against the speakers in his bag because it suddenly turned on and immediately disconnected my earphones and played my music on blast on these speakers. And right there, the whole mood and vibe of this hike changed. Picture this. We're hiking up a cobblestone road, pretty high up, with views of a little colorful town far out, and mountains, and clear blue skies, and a local old man riding up on a horse. Its tail was moving to the beat of this happy tune. The man, aged from poverty, exhaustion, and sheer hard farm work, in his big straw hat, looks at us with his big smile of joy on his face, bobbing and jiggling to the music, and everyone else around just stopped what they were doing to be in sync with the moment. It was like a scene from a movie, and that very moment, a few minutes at most, that changed the trajectory of the entire day and trip. I've tried really hard to recreate moments like this and learned one thing. When you try hard to look and create moments, you skip the ones right in front of you. We get stuck in the race of trying to be richer, smarter, funnier, happier, more successful, more powerful, more popular, that we lose sight of the beauty that is all around us every day in attempts to find the very thing, happiness. Sometimes all it takes is just being in the moment and noticing what you have now, and you will simply see that you already have it all. If you just shift your mindset and attitude to see the beauty in everything around you, you will bring about even more of it. These are some of the messages that are reinforced to me in my podcast, Multispective. There, I interview people from everywhere to share some of the most challenging and darkest moments, how they overcame them, and what they learned from their personal experiences. So many of my guests have shared this message to me. Live in the moment, ignore the other noises, and choose every day to see the wonders. The universe will give it right back to you if you just accept it. And for those of you, if you're interested in listening to my podcast, it's called Multispective, and you can find us on any podcast platform or our website, which is www.multispective.org.
My weird thing, surprising thing that happened to me was back when I had graduated from college. I was living in Fort Worth and working in Arlington, Texas, and I would go home to Richardson, which is a suburb of Dallas where my parents lived. I'd go home sometimes on the weekends. We'd go to church. You know, Mom and I go do some fun Saturday. We'd go to church, and I'd come home, then we'd come home, change, and I'd go back to Fort Worth. One Sunday, I get home, and I go into my bedroom to change, and my mom kind of disappeared. My dad comes out, and he goes, and he kind of has this little funny grin on his face, and he says, "Hey, come in, let's in for a minute. We have something we need to tell you." And I'm like, he kind of had a little spring in his step, and I'm like, okay. But then I go to the den. My mom is sitting on the couch crying, just like weeping with a tissue. And I'm thinking, it was almost like my dad was going to say, your mom's pregnant or something. It was just weird. She was way past being the age where she could be pregnant. So that was a possibility. They began to tell me a story that before she met my dad, my mom was pregnant and had a baby, and my grandmother and my mom went to Arizona She had the baby. There was a story that my grandmother's brother was sick and they needed to go take care of him. She had it put up for adoption, came home, and it was never spoken of again. Well, he had found her, and I had been corresponding, and they wanted to tell me. And I can't even tell you the feelings I had. I was so excited. It was like they said we're having a baby. I don't want to say his name. I have lots of nieces and nephews that I want to talk to them before this gets out. But he was wonderful. We did meet. I never wanted sisters, but I did want another brother. My brother and I were not very close. So anyway, we did meet, my half brother and I. He was marvelous. He had 7 kids. They lived in California. He was a minister, and he had a talk show called Talk from the Heart that was very popular. He was very good in radio. He had lots of famous people who knew him and would call it. He counseled a lot of people. But before all that, when growing up, it made sense to me why my mom said the things she said as a kid. She didn't like it when I was a little girl and some boy would have a crush on me and I'd say, yeah, we're boyfriend and girlfriend. She would get very angry about that. And I didn't understand that. One time I came home from school, I was writing a boyfriend name on a notebook over and over again. She saw it and got mad at me. And I couldn't, she would talk about someday when you get married, and I'd think, well, why would you want to get married if you're not going to have, you're not supposed to like boys? I remember one time I asked her flat out, well, how are babies made? She said, oh, well, you have to be married to have a baby. And this was my dad was in the room. And now I know I put all these things together. She was doing that because she knew she made a big mistake. And back then, her family was kind of prominent in Dallas. This thing happened to her. And there's more to the story. It's very interesting. Very interesting how Rich and I connected and the things we talked about. We had a lot in common. I still see my nieces and nephews off and on, and they're just a joy. And I'm so blessed by, not only did I gain a brother, but I gained all my nieces and nephews. Sadly, he passed away from pancreatic cancer about 5 years ago. His legend lives on, and I miss him a lot.
Hey, Scott, I just wanted to start off by saying how much I enjoy your podcast. It is wonderful. I listen to it doing everything I do through my day. I'm a homesteader, so I'm often listening to your podcast in my garden or tending to my chickens or harvesting and canning, even my day-to-day tasks like cleaning. So I just want to say thanks. It's a really great podcast. My story begins when I was 5 years old, and I went camping with my parents on Crown land on an island. Crown land camping was something my parents often did with me, and they did it a lot when they didn't have kids. This particular time, I was 5 years old, and we were camping with myself, my mom, my dad, my aunt, my uncle, and my uncle's son. Some of the story is the recount of my family members. I can remember being very excited to go camping with my parents, especially because it was just me. My younger sister, who would have been 2.5 or 3, wasn't going to be coming. So I was excited to have my parents all to myself and enjoy the weekend fishing and swimming. I can remember boating out to the island where we were going to camp. And it was, at the time, a big island to me, obviously. Being only 5 years old, I can remember exploring the island and seeing where we were going to pop the tents up and where we would swim. And I do have some memories of foraging for wild blueberries. We live in Ontario, Canada, so wild blueberries are very popular here and they are delicious. As the weekend went on, my parents decided to take me out fishing after we had dinner. And my uncle and his son went out fishing in their own boat. and my aunt stayed back on the island. As we were leaving in the boat, I can remember my aunt yelling to us that she was listening to the radio and they were calling for thunderstorms. I don't really think my parents thought too much of it. I can remember looking at the sky and seeing the blue sky and some clouds, and I don't remember at that point being worried about a storm. Not that I was worried to begin with, but I don't remember the thought of a storm or rain happening because the sky was so blue. As we were done fishing and we started to head back towards the island, the sky began to be very dark, and I can remember hearing rumblings off in the distance and asking my parents what that was, and they told me that it must just be trucks or something far away. So again, I wasn't really concerned. I didn't think I needed to be. My parents weren't concerned, and just carried on with what we were doing. As we got closer back to the island and got back on the island, there was a black sky basically on half of the island and blue sky on the other half of the island. And the thunder and lightning began. My dad had this tarp set up so we could sit under it to shade us from any rain or sun. That was something he often did when we went camping. We would have this shelter to sit under. I can remember huddling into my dad's lap as he was crouched down. My mom sitting close by and my aunt sitting the furthest away from me, but still close enough. She was sitting on a chair. My uncle and cousin were still not back yet and were still out fishing. I can remember the thunder becoming very loud, and all of a sudden there was a huge flash, and the lightning had hit the tree that we basically were all sitting under. There was a garbage bag on that had our garbage hanging on it to prevent any wildlife on the island from getting into it, and it had exploded and obliterated everywhere. I can remember my aunt screaming. Her hands and feet were on fire, and she was knocked unconscious and flew off of her chair from the electricity. After that, I don't really have any recollection of what happened. My parents said there was smoke from the tree getting hit by lightning. And later on that night, I can remember waking up to my leg and arm hurting. And there was a hole in the tent because bark from the tree had punctured the tent. I remember waking up and complaining about the pain I was in. And my dad had the pain, a similar pain on the same side of his body that I had the pain on mine. So we just assumed it was the after effects of the electricity going through our bodies. I can remember my uncle and his son coming back after the storm had hit, and they had no idea it had even stormed. They heard thunder in the distance, but didn't realize it was over the lake at that point because the lake we were on was a very big lake. Still to this day, I am terrified of storms, and so is my aunt. She ended up being okay. We were all okay, luckily. Well, physically okay, I mean. Mentally and psychologically, not so much. My entire life, I've struggled with storms. As I said, I'm terrified of them. The older I got, the worse it got, and still is the older I'm getting, and I'm 32. My parents brought me to the doctor after it happened just to have me checked out, make sure I was okay. And the doctor told them that I should grow out of any fears I might have surrounding storms and forget about it. But I've not forgotten. It is something that still haunts me, and it's something that with every storm, the memories come back and I'm afraid. So I'm often inside my house. You will not see me camping or anywhere that I don't feel safe if a storm is to approach. We are lucky that our farmhouse where we live right now is kind of in a little valley, and so often any storms that happen will happen to the north of us or the south of us, but usually skips our house. People are often shocked when I say that when I was a little girl, I was hit by lightning. Now, I mean, I wasn't directly hit by lightning, but we were on the roots of the tree where lightning hit the tree and we felt it.
Hi, Scott. My name's Lyndall, and I'm sending in a listener tale from Australia. So, going back about 10 years, my partner and I had 3 kids. We had a 1-year-old, 4.5, and 5.5. And everything was great. We just never really got much time away. So, when the opportunity arose to have a whole weekend away, we jumped at it. We took the kids up to my parents. It was about a 2.5-hour drive. And on the way, the youngest one vomited. And we didn't think too much of it. Cleaned her up and kept going. And we got to my parents and I let my mum know. She's like, no, it'll be fine. You go, have fun. And we gave her an extra car seat and off we went. So we had a fantastic time. We did a tour of the jail, a nighttime tour, which was really great. And we were getting ready to order room service, and my mum rang up and she just wanted to let us know that there had been more vomiting and more diarrhea. So the youngest one had the gastro tummy bug. So we were like, oh dear. She's like, no, it's okay. She's handling it really well. We'll call you if there's any issues. You stay, you have fun, go for it. They had plenty of help. My dad was there and my sister was there to help out as well. So we're like, okay, all right, no worries. We'll keep going. We ordered room service and I started to feel unwell. I didn't say anything at first and our food came and I started eating it and my partner was a little bit annoyed. He wanted a romantic dinner and I was just trying to put that sick feeling at bay, hoping that I was just hungry. And I wasn't. It wasn't long before I myself had my head in the toilet, followed by the other end. And yeah, that was how I spent most of my Friday night. So unfortunately we had to cancel. We had a nice tour booked for the next morning, a tunnels tour, and I spent the morning in bed. So my partner wandered around the town and made phone calls and generally amused himself and come in and check on me. And we were getting close to lunchtime. And I said to him, look, I think I'm starting to feel better. I'll be able to push through. I'll just lay in bed a little bit longer and I'll be up and moving and we'll continue what we're going to do. So he decided to go to a pub and have a beer. And whilst he was doing that, he was on the phone to my mum and the kids and having a chat with them. And next thing he hears a scream and oh my God, there's so much blood. And so he had to anxiously await somebody to come back to the phone and say that our son, who is a bit too curious for his own good, had stuck his finger in the fan just to see what happens. And yeah, the fan got smashed and there was blood everywhere and my dad and my sister were taking him to their local hospital. So my partner hung up from my mum and he quickly rang me and he said, this is what's happened. Grab the stuff, let's go. So I'm in the hotel room just trying to chuck stuff in the bag. It won't go in, so I just gathered it up in my arms and I've got bags and pillows and everything hanging off me and I'm running through the hotel and he meets me in the lobby, grabs some stuff off me. We must have looked a rare sight. Running out of the hotel like that, jumped in the car and went to the hospital, met up with my dad and he's like, yep, they've got him in x-rays and they're just trying to find out if it's broken before they start stitching it up. So thankfully it wasn't broken. He got some stitches and it all seemed to settle down after that. We went back to my mum and dad's and we had a bit of a discussion and he was handling it really well and the little one was coming better with a gastro. And so we decided to push on through. My mum was like, no, we're going to do this. So off we went again and my partner wanted to go fishing and I'm like, I don't know if I could handle this smell right now. So we went and sat at the beach for a little bit and it was all good and I was coming better. I was feeling a lot better. So we went out to dinner and there was a Ferris wheel across in the park. And so we jumped on this Ferris wheel and we got to the top and he got down on one knee and he proposed to me. So that was just, oh, yeah. And he said to me later that he would never have pushed through the weekend if he hadn't had that ultimate plan at the end. So it was quite an eventful weekend. And 6 months later, we flew into state and we got married. So a nice little small wedding. And we had our second time away from the kids. And lo and behold, about 5:30 in the morning, the hotel fire alarm went off. And we all got pushed outside in our dressing gowns. And so we said, "So this," we just packed up our stuff and went and had a nice family holiday.
My father has an older brother, my Uncle Steve, and he's married to my Aunt Pamela. And they had 3 children, 2 boys and a little girl. And their middle child, his name was Chris. And he was like just a stud. He was so very handsome growing up, all through high school and college, Mr. Popularity, and just really, really intelligent. My uncle is a well-known physician in his area, and Chris was well on his way to becoming the same, just a really bright guy. He had a lot going for him, but he did suffer from depression. And in college, he also started taking really heavy drugs a lot, which of course made his depression even worse. And he was starting to spiral. And one night he just couldn't handle life anymore. So he ended up taking his own life. He did use a gun. And to make matters just horribly worse, he shot his girlfriend before he shot himself. The bullet grazed her and she survived. She was fine, but he did attempt to do that, which makes matters all the more awful. Of course, my aunt and uncle were just overwhelmed with grief. The death of a child is always horrific. I feel like add on to that, death from suicide is just another layer of heartache. So unnecessary, so many questions that go through their minds. Anyway, 18 years had gone by since this had happened, and life goes on, has to. And their 2 other kids were adults now with their own children. And around this time, my cousin, Jamie, gets a Facebook message out of nowhere, really. And it read, "Dear Jamie, this is Jack. I'm writing you because my mother promised me when I turned 18, she would let me know who my father is. And it turns out that my father is your brother, Chris." And Jamie couldn't believe it. She went to his profile page and it was like she was looking at Chris all over again. This kid, Jack, was the spitting image of her brother who had passed away so long ago. And he was also such a good kid, such a sweet kid. Jack flew out to see the family immediately and met with everyone. And of course, my aunt and uncle were just completely overwhelmed with emotion upon seeing this grandchild they didn't know about, a piece of their son right there, someone that looked exactly like their son. It was like having Chris back again. Jack, now he visits them every holiday and they're very, very close. And it's just amazing that they had such a miracle happen so far after this horrible tragedy, so many years of grieving. They had this boy that was just like their baby Chris. And I really appreciate Jack's mother for letting him know. And I understand why she waited till he was 18. The circumstances of what happened to his father and what he tried to do to her were obviously something that needed to be told to somebody who could handle it at a certain age. She did say that Chris did not know she was pregnant, and she didn't know she was pregnant when the incident occurred that night. So no one knew until 18 years later, and they got reunited, and it's just helped my aunt and uncle and my cousins heal in a way they never thought possible, to have a piece of
their son and their brother there and just looking exactly like him, the same mannerisms and everything else. And it's just a blessing that they're so close. So it turned out to be something really beautiful at the end. It took a long time to get there and a lot of grieving, but I'm just really so happy for them that they had this grandson that they didn't know about, to cherish the memories of the son that they lost.
Hi, my name is Lexi, and when I was around 15 years old, I'm 20 now, I had a friend who was also 15, and she had a boyfriend who was 26 years old. And at the time when I was 15, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't realize how wrong it was until I got older. And he would buy me and my friends alcohol and weed in order for us to keep quiet about their little vacations they would go on. The bad part about it, well, I mean, the whole thing is bad, but the extra bad part is that he was her older sister's baby daddy's older brother. So they would see each other at like family gatherings and stuff. And they would just have to keep it quiet. But the crazy part is that they're still together to this day. And it's just crazy to me because when she gets older, she's going to realize that he is a child predator because he will go for somebody that is or was her age when he did that to her.
In June of 2019, I decided it was time to propose to my girlfriend of 4 years. As most guys, I had no idea how I was going to do it. I knew I wanted it to be truly special, and I wanted it to be recorded somehow. I wanted to really, really surprise her. My initial thought was actually just do it in Colorado while we were hiking. That's where I first told her that I loved her, and it seemed like the perfect setting. But in thinking more about it, it just seemed too generic, too basic. My next thought was to reach out to our favorite band at the time, the Lumineers, to see if they could help me propose because we were going to the Bonnaroo Music Festival a few weeks later, and they were performing there. But after a few attempts, I never got a reply from any of the band members. Then it hit me. The ring that I was going to get Nicole was actually at a jeweler that I had a connection with down in Atlanta. And it just so happened that Nicole and her boss were getting ready to leave for a work trip in Atlanta. They were actually leaving a few days from the time I had the thought to even propose this way. So I had a lot to figure out, and I had to do it fast. So I called Nicole's boss and told her my plan. I would fly down early in the morning on the last full day of the whole trip. They would actually be at the same venue of the jeweler, so we would have to coordinate on where they were in the venue at all the different times that I was going to be there, so I could sneak in to pick up the ring and sneak back out. Then that day, after they finished working, her boss was going to take her out to a nice dinner at STK in downtown Atlanta, a really nice steak restaurant. Once they got seated, she would then text me, and I would come into the restaurant and ask the hostess to follow behind me and film my proposal. Her boss loved the plan, and she was all on board to help me do anything and everything I needed to do to make sure that this proposal went off without a hitch. Now that I had coordinated with the jeweler and I had my plan set, I needed to get Nicole's parents' blessing. So a day prior to what would be the day that I ended up proposing, I called Nicole's dad to see if I could swing by after I got off work that day. At this point, Nicole was already out of town and she was already down in Atlanta. I didn't tell him, what I was coming over for, but he had an idea. At that point, we'd been dating for a handful of years, and he probably, expected this would be about the time that I would be proposing. I told him my plan. I asked for his blessing, and of course, he said yes. He couldn't have been more excited, and he just absolutely loved the plan. I called Nicole's mom after leaving her dad's house to go over to meet with her and her husband, Nicole's stepfather. And I followed those same steps, which resulted in her mom immediately being overcome with tears of joy and a huge yes. So great. I had both blessings. I had the plan with the jeweler, and I had a plan with Nicole's boss. But now I had to put the plan into full action. So after getting both of those blessings, I booked my plane ticket for 5 a.m. the next morning. The hardest part of all this was not slipping up and giving anything away to Nicole. She can read me like a book, but I played it cool, and she never suspected a thing when I spoke to her that night on the phone. I woke up at 2 a.m. the next day, too anxious to sleep. I put on my best suit, and I got to the airport. I arrived in Atlanta. I dropped off my bags at the hotel and went to the Atlanta Apparel Market, which is where that jeweler was located, along with where my wife and her boss were already at doing all their buying for their their local clothing boutique. The building is set up kind of like a huge vertical mall with an open atrium so that you can actually see all the other people walking around all the other levels. So Nicole's boss and I had to coordinate every time we were moving around the building so that I would avoid being caught. I had to get in and get out as fast as I could without my wife being able to see me from across the venue. So I did it. I got in, I got the ring, and I got out as fast as I could. At this point, I still had a few hours left before dinner. So I went and got a good workout in. Then I came back to the hotel, took a nice shower, got fully dressed again, and just sat there anxiously sweating, waiting on her boss to let me know when they were going to be at dinner. Her boss texted me. I get in my Uber and I head that way. I walked in like a man on a mission. I was fully already sweating through the shirt underneath my suit jacket in anxiousness. I asked the hostess to follow me to the table while recording on my phone. I get to the table with the hostess following right behind me filming. And I said, "Hey, Nicole." And her first response, the first thing we had on video was, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And pure shock that instantly turned to full-on blubbering tears when she saw me get down on her knee and realize what I was there to do. I was there to propose to her. I took away from the table, and we sat there hugging, kissing, and her crying, just tears of joy. And I said, "Is that a yes?" And that's how I proposed to my girlfriend. To my amazement, that video actually went viral, both shared on mine and Nicole's Facebooks and Instagrams. And then we actually had a bunch of other accounts that reshared that same video. What was awesome is that a few days later, after flying back home to Kansas City, we then got to celebrate by going to Bonnaroo just a few days later, where we got to watch our favorite band perform, who actually had never responded to me asking to help me propose to my girlfriend. I wanted to say thank you to Scott for allowing me to share my personal story. My name is Marcus Gates. I'm an online fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle coach, owner of Thriving Lives Fitness. I help my clients tackle their health goals through sustainable approaches, focusing on balance. Through weekly accountability check-ins and reflections, I hold my clients accountable and I guide them every step of the way towards their health and fitness goals. In fact, I'm actually Scott's coach. He's been with me for most of 2023 and has done an incredible job of not only reaching his goals that he came to me with, but the most important aspect is that he's maintained those results that he's gotten and continues to strive and get better and better every single week. You can find me on Instagram at Thriving Lives Fitness, all one word, and my website, thrivinglivesfitness.com. With 2024 just a few weeks away, I would love to work with you on whatever your health goals are.
If there's one thing I've learned from doing this show, it's that people have lots of stories. Some stories are so unusual they get a full episode, and some stories are shorter so they work as a listener story. Either way, I love hearing them. It's actually the reason I started doing this podcast over 5 years ago, because I love hearing people tell stories. And it's pretty obvious that I'm not the only one. Sometime in the next few weeks, this podcast will pass a milestone by being downloaded more than 10 million times. It's a little hard to believe, honestly. When I started the show, I knew that there was power in storytelling, and obviously that's true based on the way the audience has grown. But for this show, I want to do more than just bring you a story for the entertainment value. Now, for some episodes, entertainment actually is the main thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for a lot of the stories we cover here, I want it to be more than that. Many of my guests have been through something tragic or traumatic, and they have a big purpose in telling their story. They might want to bring more awareness to safety around swimming pools, or organ donation, or the dangers of a child in a hot car. These are people on a mission to help others, and telling that story here on the podcast is one way they can do that. For me, I'm honored that I can be a part of getting their message out to a lot of people. I always count that as a great privilege to be able to play a part in that. For 2024, I already have some great shows in the works, and I'll be visiting places all over the country, including Los Angeles, Orlando, Nashville, and Washington, D.C., so if you happen to be nearby, maybe we can connect. I really feel like 2024 is going to be a great year. You can get a full transcript for this episode at whatwasthatlike.com/162. And if you like this episode, you might like our previous episodes full of listener stories, Just scroll back through the past episodes, you'll find them. And now here's a recent review left by Amanda in Apple Podcasts.
I've listened to all of your episodes, but episode 151 was a game changer. You took your interviewing skills to the next level. Great job.
And if you're wondering which episode Amanda was referring to, episode 151 is titled Laura's Pain Became Her Purpose. If you haven't heard that one, grab a box of tissues and listen to a story that you won't forget. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. No listener story for this episode because the whole episode was listener stories. But I've got some great episodes and more great listener stories lined up for 2024. Stay safe, and I'll see you in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.